Hello, horror lover. Are you ready for a long night of nightmares? Before we begin, I want to ask you to subscribe to the channel, and especially leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from. I'd love to know. Click the like button, all of this because I stumbled into my apartment exhausted from another grueling day at the office. The silence that greeted me was a familiar comfort, a reminder of the solitude I'd grown accustomed to over the past year. Shrugging off my jacket, I made my way to the bathroom, desperate for a hot shower to wash away the stress of the day. As I flicked on the light, something caught my eye. A small plastic stick lay on the edge of the sink, innocuous, yet completely out of place. My brow furrowed as I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. It took a moment for recognition to dawn, and when it did, my heart began to race. A pregnancy test. A positive pregnancy test. What the hell? I muttered, my voice echoing in the small space. I stared at the two pink lines clear as day, mocking me with their impossible presence. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I lived alone. I hadn't been with anyone in months. There was no logical explanation for this test to be here, let alone for it to be positive. This has to be a mistake, I said to myself, shaking the test as if that would somehow change the result. Or a prank. Yeah, that's it. Someone's playing a sick joke. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. No one had access to my apartment except me. I hadn't had any visitors, not even the landlord, in weeks. The test must have appeared here by some other means. I set the test back down on the sink, my hands shaking slightly. Taking a deep breath, I tried to approach the situation rationally. Okay, Tom, I said to my reflection in the mirror. Let's think this through. There has to be a logical explanation. But the more I thought about it, the more my anxiety grew. I began to pace the small bathroom, my mind conjuring up increasingly bizarre scenarios. Had someone broken in? Was I sleepwalking and somehow acquiring pregnancy tests? Was I losing my mind? A sudden chill ran down my spine as I noticed something I hadn't before. The bathroom window, which I always kept locked, was slightly ajar. I approached it cautiously, peering out into the darkness of the alley below. Nothing seemed out of place, but the open window sent a wave of unease through me. "Hello?" I called out, feeling foolish but unable to shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Only silence answered me. I quickly closed and locked the window, double-checking it to make sure it was secure. As I turned back to face the bathroom, the pregnancy test seemed to loom larger than before, a harbinger of something sinister. Unable to bear the sight of it any longer, I snatched up the test and stormed out of the bathroom. I needed to get rid of it to pretend I had never seen it. But as I stood over the kitchen trash can, test in hand, I hesitated. What if I needed it as evidence? Evidence of what? I wasn't sure, but discarding it felt like a mistake. In the end, I shoved it into a Ziploc bag and tucked it away in a kitchen drawer. Out of sight, but not out of mind. Sleep eluded me that night. Every creak of the building, every distant siren, every gust of wind against the window set my nerves on edge. I tossed and turned, my mind replaying the discovery of the test over and over. At around 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep altogether. I sat up in bed, reaching for my phone. My fingers hovered over the keypad as I debated who to call. My sister? My best friend? The police? How could I explain this without sounding completely insane? In the end, I didn't call anyone. Instead, I found myself Googling, "Man finds positive pregnancy test in apartment." The results were a mix of horror stories, pranks gone wrong, and medical anomalies. None of them provided any comfort or explanation for my situation. As the first light of dawn began to creep through my curtains, I made a decision. I couldn't just sit here and wait for an explanation to present itself. I needed to take action, to figure out what was going on. I got dressed quickly, my movements fueled by a mix of determination and fear. I would start by questioning my neighbors, then move on to the building superintendent. Someone must have seen or heard something unusual. But as I reached for my doorknob, a thought stopped me cold. What if whoever left the test was still out there, watching, waiting? What if by investigating, I was walking right into their trap? I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door, closing my eyes and taking deep breaths. "Get it together, Tom," I whispered to myself. "You can't just hide in here forever." With a trembling hand, I opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. The corridor stretched before me, silent and empty. But as I locked my apartment behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere someone was watching, laughing at my confusion and fear. I didn't know it then, but this was only the beginning. The positive pregnancy test was just the first clue in a twisted mystery that would turn my life upside down and challenge everything I thought I knew about myself and those around me. The days following the discovery of the pregnancy test were a blur of paranoia and sleepless nights. I tried to convince myself it was a one-time occurrence, a bizarre anomaly that would never be repeated. But as the week wore on, a series of small, unsettling incidents began to chip away at my fragile sense of security. It started with my toothbrush. I had just returned home from work, exhausted and looking forward to a quiet evening. As I entered the bathroom to wash up, I reached for my toothbrush and froze. The bristles were damp, water droplets still clinging to them. "What the hell?" I muttered, my heart rate accelerating. I distinctly remembered using it that morning before work, and I lived alone. There was no reason for it to be wet now. I picked up the toothbrush with trembling fingers, examining it closely. It looked normal, but the moisture was undeniable. A wave of nausea swept over me as I considered the implications. Someone had been in my apartment using my personal items. "Get a grip, Tom," I said aloud, trying to steady myself. "There has to be a logical explanation." But try as I might, I couldn't come up with one. I ended up throwing the toothbrush away and buying a new one, unable to shake the feeling of violation. The next incident occurred 2 days later. I was getting ready for bed, pulling back the covers when something caught my eye. There, stark against the white of my pillowcase, was a long strand of blonde hair. My breath caught in my throat. My hair was dark brown, almost black. This hair was unmistakably blonde, long and fine. I picked it up, holding it to the light as if it might suddenly transform into something less sinister. "This can't be happening," I whispered, my voice shaky. I spent the next hour searching my apartment, looking for any sign of an intruder. But everything was in its place, nothing obviously disturbed. Except for that single strand of hair, there was no evidence anyone but me had been there. The following day, I returned home to find my laptop had been moved. It was subtle, just a few inches to the left of where I always kept it. But I noticed immediately. My hands shook as I opened it, dreading what I might find. To my relief, all my files seemed intact. There was no evidence anyone had accessed it, but the fact that it had been moved at all sent a chill down my spine. "Hello?" I called out, feeling foolish but unable to shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. "Is anyone here?" Only silence answered me, but it felt heavy, oppressive, as if the very air was holding its breath. I spent that night at a hotel, unable to face sleeping in my apartment. But when I returned the next day, I was confronted with the most disturbing development yet. As I walked into my bedroom, I noticed something odd about the laundry basket in the corner. It was empty. Frowning, I walked over to my dresser and pulled open a drawer. There, neatly folded and organized, were all the clothes that had been in the basket. "No," I breathed, stumbling backward. "No, no, no." I hadn't done laundry in days. The basket had been overflowing with dirty clothes when I left for work that morning. Now, everything was clean, folded, and put away with meticulous care. Panic clawed at my throat as I frantically searched the apartment, looking for any sign of the intruder. But once again, everything else was in its place. No doors or windows had been forced. It was as if a ghost had come in, done my laundry, and vanished without a trace. I sank onto the edge of my bed, my head in my hands. "This can't be real," I muttered. "I must be losing my mind." Just then, a sound from outside my apartment made me freeze. Footsteps, soft but distinct, echoing in the hallway. My blood ran cold as I strained to listen. The footsteps paused outside my door. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tense. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then, slowly, the footsteps resumed, fading away down the corridor. I remained frozen in place long after the sound had disappeared. My mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Was someone stalking me? Had I become the target of some elaborate psychological torture? Or was I simply losing my grip on reality? With shaking hands, I reached for my phone and dialed the police. As it rang, I tried to organize my thoughts, to find a way to explain the series of inexplicable events without sounding completely insane. 911. What's your emergency? A calm voice answered. I took a deep breath. I need to report a break-in, or maybe a stalker, I'm not sure. But someone's been in my apartment. Are you in immediate danger, sir? The operator asked. I don't know, I replied, realizing how uncertain I was about everything. They're not here now, I don't think, but things keep happening, things I can't explain. As I recounted the events of the past week, the pregnancy test, the toothbrush, the hair, the laptop, the laundry, and finally the footsteps, I could hear the skepticism in the operator's voice. It sounded crazy, even to my own ears. We'll send an officer to take a report, the operator said finally. But sir, if you're feeling unsafe, perhaps you should consider staying with a friend or family member for a few days. I nodded, then remembered she couldn't see me. Yeah, maybe I should, thank you. As I hung up, I realized I was shaking. The idea of staying here alone, waiting for whatever might happen next, was unbearable. But the thought of leaving, of letting whoever was doing this win, filled me with a strange mix of fear and defiance. In that moment, I made a decision. I wouldn't run. I would face this head on. Whatever was happening, whoever was behind it, I would find out the truth. The decision to install hidden cameras throughout my apartment wasn't an easy one. It felt like an invasion of my own privacy, a tacit admission that my home was no longer my sanctuary. But after weeks of unexplained occurrences, I knew I needed concrete evidence. If not for the authorities, then at least for my own sanity. My hands trembled as I carefully positioned each tiny camera, strategically placing them to cover every possible entry point and main living area. As I worked, my mind raced with possibilities of what the footage might reveal. Would I catch the intruder in the act? Or would the cameras show nothing, leaving me to question my own grip on reality? This has to work, I muttered to myself, adjusting the final camera. Something has to explain all of this. With the cameras in place, I left for work the next morning with a mixture of dread and anticipation churning in my stomach. The workday crawled by, my thoughts constantly drifting to what might be happening in my apartment at that very moment. When I finally returned home that evening, everything seemed normal at first glance. I began to relax slightly, thinking perhaps the presence of the cameras had deterred any intrusion. But as I walked into the kitchen, my heart nearly stopped. There, on the kitchen counter, sat a cup of tea. Steam still rose from its surface, curling lazily in the air. No, I whispered, my voice hoarse with fear. No, no, no. I approached the cup cautiously, as if it might suddenly come to life. The scent of chamomile wafted up, familiar and yet terrifyingly out of place. I hadn't made tea. I hadn't even been home. Which meant... My hands shook as I reached for my phone, pulling up the app connected to the hidden cameras. I needed to see the footage now. Consequences be damned. As the first video began to play, my breath caught in my throat. The timestamp showed it was from just an hour ago. At first, the living room appeared empty, everything still and quiet. Then, almost imperceptibly, a shadow moved across the frame. Oh God, I breathed, my fingers tightening around the phone. The shadow solidified into a figure, moving with eerie familiarity through my living space. It was clear this wasn't the first time they had been here. They knew exactly where everything was, navigating the room with the ease of someone intimately familiar with the layout. As the figure turned towards the camera, I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. Even in the dim light, even with the grainy quality of the footage, I recognized that silhouette. It was a shape I knew all too well, one that had once been a source of comfort, but now filled me with abject terror. "Sarah?" I whispered, disbelief coloring my voice. Sarah, my ex-girlfriend, the woman I had broken up with over a year ago, the last person I would have expected to see in my apartment. As I watched, Sarah moved from the living room to the bedroom, my bedroom. I switched to the camera feed from there, my heart pounding so loudly, I was sure it would drown out any sound from the video. What I saw next made my blood run cold. Sarah approached my bed, her movements slow and almost reverent. She reached out, gently caressing my pillow. Her lips were moving, and I frantically turned up the volume to hear what she was saying. "Soon, my love." Sarah's voice came through, soft and loving. "Soon we'll be a family. You, me, and our little one. I know you're scared now, but you'll understand eventually. This is meant to be." A scream built in my throat, but I choked it back, unable to tear my eyes away from the horrifying scene unfolding on my phone screen. Sarah continued to stroke the pillow, speaking to it as if it were me, as if we were still together, as if she wasn't currently violating every boundary imaginable. The footage showed her eventually leaving the bedroom and heading to the kitchen, where she prepared the cup of tea I had found. She left it on the counter, a bizarre offering or perhaps a sign of her delusional domesticity. As Sarah finally left the apartment, I collapsed onto the couch, my mind reeling. The mystery of the intruder was solved, but in its place was a horror I couldn't have imagined. Sarah, my ex-girlfriend, had been breaking into my apartment. Sarah had left the pregnancy test. Sarah had been living some twisted fantasy life in my space when I wasn't here. "This can't be happening," I said aloud, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. "This can't be real." But the evidence was undeniable. The footage, the tea, the pregnancy test, it all pointed to a terrifying truth. Sarah had become obsessed, delusional, and somehow she had convinced herself that we were still together, that we were going to have a child. I fumbled for my phone again, this time to call the police. But as my finger hovered over the dial button, a new fear gripped me. What if they didn't believe me? What if Sarah somehow convinced them that I was the crazy one? Or worse, what if confronting her like this caused her to become violent? No, I needed to handle this carefully. I needed a plan. But first, I needed to make sure I was safe for the night. With shaking hands, I began to move furniture in front of the door, creating a barricade. I checked and rechecked every window, every possible entry point. As I worked, my mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? How had Sarah gotten a key to my apartment? And most terrifyingly, what was her end game? As the night wore on, I sat in the darkness of my living room, the glow of my phone illuminating my face as I watched the camera feeds with hawk-like intensity. Every shadow, every creak of the building made me jump. I knew that come morning, I would have to face this head-on. I would have to confront Sarah, involve the authorities, reclaim my life and my space. But for now, in the quiet dark of night, all I could do was watch and wait, a prisoner in my own home, haunted by the presence of a woman I thought I had left in my past. As the first light of dawn crept through my windows, I found myself lost in a whirlpool of memories. The shock of discovering Sarah's intrusion had worn off, replaced by a gnawing sense of guilt and self-doubt. How had I missed the signs? How had our relationship deteriorated to this point? I closed my eyes, allowing myself to be pulled back to the beginning of our relationship. Sarah had been vibrant, full of life and laughter. Her blue eyes sparkled when she smiled, and her blonde hair caught the sunlight in a way that always took my breath away. We were happy, or so I thought. "You're the one, Tom," she had said to me once, her voice filled with conviction. "We're going to build an amazing life together." I remembered smiling, caught up in the romance of the moment. But now, with the benefit of hindsight, I could see the intensity in her eyes that should have given me pause. As our relationship progressed, Sarah's desire for children became increasingly apparent. It started subtly at first, cooing over babies in the park, lingering a bit too long in the baby aisle at the supermarket, but soon it became an obsession. "Wouldn't it be wonderful to have a little one of our own?" she would say, her eyes shining with excitement. I would always respond the same way. "Sarah, we've talked about this. I'm not ready for children. I'm not sure I ever will be." Her face would fall, but she'd quickly mask her disappointment. "Of course I understand. When you're ready, I'll be here." But she didn't understand, and she wasn't willing to wait. I shuddered as I recalled the night things took a turn for the worse. We had been out for dinner, celebrating our 2-year anniversary. The restaurant was romantic, the wine was flowing, and Sarah was practically glowing with happiness. Then, without warning, she dropped a bombshell. "I've stopped taking my birth control," she announced, reaching across the table to grasp my hand. "I think it's time we started our family." The memory of the shock and betrayal I felt in that moment was still raw. "You did what?" I had sputtered, pulling my hand away. "Sarah, how could you make that decision without talking to me?" Her eyes had widened, a mix of confusion and hurt crossing her face. "But I thought you'd be happy. We're meant to be parents, Tom. I can feel it." The argument that followed was brutal. Harsh words were exchanged, years of pent-up frustrations bubbling to the surface. It ended with me storming out of the restaurant, leaving Sarah in tears. Guilt and fear intertwined in my gut as I remembered the final confrontation a few days later. I had invited Sarah over, determined to end things once and for all. "This isn't working, Sarah," I had said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We want different things. It's time we went our separate ways." The look in her eyes still haunted me. There was desperation there, yes, but also something else. Something wild and unhinged that I hadn't recognized at the time. "No," she had whispered, shaking her head vehemently. "No, you don't mean that. We're meant to be together, Tom. We're going to have a family." "Sarah, please," I had pleaded. "This is hard enough as it is. We're not having children. We're not staying together. It's over." She had lunged at me then, her nails raking across my cheek as she screamed, "You can't leave me, you can't leave us." It had taken all my strength to remove her from my apartment that night. As I closed the door on her tear-streaked face, I thought I was closing that chapter of my life for good. How wrong I had been. How sitting in my living room surrounded by evidence of Sarah's continued presence in my life, my stomach churned. The extent of her delusion was becoming clear, and it terrified me. She truly believed she was pregnant with my child, that we were still together, that we were going to be a family. A cold sweat broke out across my forehead as I contemplated my next move. I knew I needed to confront Sarah, to put an end to this madness once and for all. But how would she react? The woman I had seen in the camera footage was not the Sarah I had known. She was unpredictable, potentially dangerous. I reached for my phone, my hand hovering over the keypad. Should I call the police? A lawyer? Sarah herself? Each option seemed fraught with potential pitfalls. Finally, I made a decision. I would meet Sarah face to face, but on neutral ground, somewhere public, where she couldn't make a scene without drawing attention. With trembling fingers, I typed out a text message. "Sarah, we need to talk. Meet me at the coffee shop on 5th Street at 2 p.m. today. It's important." I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Almost immediately, my phone pinged with a reply. "Of course, my love. I'll be there. Can't wait to see you and talk about our future." The casual tone of her response sent a chill down my spine. It was as if the past year of separation had never happened in her mind. As I prepared to leave for the meeting, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. Dark circles shadowed my eyes and worry lines creased my forehead. I hardly recognized the man staring back at me. "You can do this," I told my reflection, trying to summon courage I didn't feel. "You have to do this." With a deep breath, I stepped out of my apartment, locking the door securely behind me. As I made my way to the coffee shop, My mind raced with all the possible ways this confrontation could go. Would Sarah listen to reason? Would she become violent? Would I be able to get through to her at all? One thing was certain. After today, nothing would ever be the same. I was walking into a storm, and I could only hope I'd emerge on the other side intact. The coffee shop confrontation had been a disaster. Sarah had shown up, her eyes gleaming with a manic light, talking about our future and the baby as if the past year had never happened. My attempts to reason with her fell on deaf ears. When I finally managed to tell her in no uncertain terms that we were not together and never would be again, she had flown into a rage, screaming about how I couldn't abandon our family. The scene had ended with her being escorted out by security, leaving me shaken and more afraid than ever. It was clear that reasoning with Sarah was impossible. She was too far gone, lost in her delusions. That left me with only one option. I had to catch her in the act. Only then would I have the evidence I needed to get the authorities to take me seriously. The plan was simple but terrifying in its execution. I would pretend to leave for work as usual, but instead of going to the office, I would hide in my bedroom closet. From there, I could watch and record Sarah's intrusion, providing irrefutable proof of her actions. As I prepared for the trap, adrenaline coursed through my veins. My hands shook as I set up a small camera in the closet, angling it towards the bedroom door. I checked and rechecked my phone, making sure it was fully charged and ready to dial 911 at a moment's notice. "You can do this," I whispered to myself, trying to calm my racing heart. "It'll all be over soon." At precisely 8:15 a.m., my usual departure time, I made a show of leaving the apartment. I slammed the door loudly, then tiptoed back to my bedroom, slipping silently into the closet. And then I waited. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. Every small sound made me jump. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant siren of an ambulance, the creaking of the building settling. My nerves were frayed to the breaking point, every muscle tense and ready for action. An hour passed, then two. I began to wonder if Sarah would show up at all. Maybe she had sensed the trap. Maybe she had given up her obsession. Just as I was considering abandoning the plan, I heard it. The soft, almost imperceptible sound of a key in the lock. My heart began to pound so loudly I was sure it would give me away. I held my breath, straining my ears to catch every sound. The front door opened with a gentle creak, then closed again. Soft footsteps padded across the living room floor. "Tom?" Sarah's voice called out, a note of confusion in her tone. "Are you home, darling? I thought you'd be at work." I remained frozen in the closet, watching through a crack in the door as Sarah entered the bedroom. My jaw dropped in shock. Her belly was swollen, unmistakably pregnant. But how? When? My mind reeled as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Sarah moved to the bed, running her hand lovingly over the covers. She began to sing softly, a lullaby I didn't recognize. "Hush, little baby. Don't you cry. Daddy's gonna love us by and by." The sight was surreal and terrifying. This woman, this stranger wearing Sarah's face, was living in a world of her own making. A world where we were still together, where we were expecting a child, where everything was as she wished it to be. As she sang, Sarah began to tidy the room, straightening items on the dresser, fluffing pillows. It was clear she had done this many times before, slipping into my life when I wasn't there to play out her fantasies. I watched, my horror growing as she pulled out a small book from her bag. A baby name book. She settled on the bed, flipping through the pages. "What do you think, little one?" she murmured, patting her belly. "Should we go with Thomas Jr. if you're a boy? Or maybe Sarah if you're a girl? Daddy will be so excited when we tell him we've chosen a name." My hand trembled as I reached for my phone. This had gone on long enough. I needed to end this now, before it went any further. But just as I was about to dial, Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes fixing on the closet door. "Tom," she called out, her voice trembling slightly. "Is that you? Are you hiding from us?" I froze, hardly daring to breathe. Had she heard me? Seen me? Or was this just another part of her delusion? Sarah stood slowly, one hand cradling her pregnant belly, the other reaching out towards the closet. "It's okay, darling," she cooed. "You don't have to be afraid. I know you're scared about becoming a father, but we're going to be so happy together, you'll see." She took a step towards the closet, then another. My heart was racing so fast I thought it might burst from my chest. This was it. In a moment, she would open the door and find me. What would she do? How would she react? Just as her hand touched the closet door handle, a loud crash came from the living room. We both jumped, startled by the sudden noise. "Hello?" A gruff voice called out. "This is the police. Is anyone home?" Sarah's eyes widened in panic. She looked from the bedroom door to the closet, indecision clear on her face. Then, with a quiet whimper, she turned and fled, her footsteps quickly fading as she escaped through the front door. I sagged against the wall of the closet, relief washing over me in a dizzying wave. The police. My neighbors must have heard something and called them. I had been saved by mere chance. As I stumbled out of the closet, legs shaky from hours of cramped stillness, I knew this was far from over. Sarah was still out there, still delusional, still pregnant with what she believed to be our child. But now I had proof. Now I had a chance to end this nightmare once and for all. My heart thundered in my chest as Sarah's footsteps drew closer to the closet. The air felt thick, making it difficult to breathe. I pressed myself against the back wall, willing myself to become invisible. But there was nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. "Tom?" Sarah's voice was soft, almost tender. "I know you're in there, darling. Come out, let's talk about this." I remained frozen, unable to move or speak. The closet door began to open slowly, light spilling into my hiding place. Sarah's silhouette appeared in the doorway, her pregnant belly prominent. "There you are," she said, her eyes locking onto mine. A mixture of emotions flashed across her face. Relief, joy, and then, as she took in my terrified expression, confusion. "Why are you hiding from us, Tom?" she asked, reaching out to touch my arm. I flinched away and hurt clouded her features. "Don't you want to be with your family?" Before I could respond, a loud crash echoed through the apartment. Sarah whirled around, and I peered past her to see my front door flying open, splintering at the hinges. "Police! Don't move!" a gruff voice shouted. In that instant, everything seemed to happen at once. Two officers burst into the bedroom, their weapons drawn. Sarah screamed, stumbling backward into me. I caught her reflexively, then immediately regretted it as she clung to me. "Tom, what's happening?" she cried, her eyes wild with fear. "Tell them there's been a mistake." But I couldn't speak. Relief and horror warred within me as I watched the officers approach. One of them, a tall woman with a stern expression, addressed us. "Ma'am, I need you to step away from him slowly," she commanded. Sarah shook her head vehemently. "No, this is my husband. We're having a baby. There's been a misunderstanding." The female officer's gaze flicked to me, and I managed to find my voice. "She's not my wife," I croaked. "She's my ex-girlfriend. She's been breaking into my apartment." The look of betrayal that crossed Sarah's face in that moment would haunt me for years to come. Her blue eyes, once filled with love, now burned with a mixture of hurt and rage. "How can you say that?" she screamed, her hands gripping my shirt. "After everything we've been through? After the baby?" The officers moved swiftly, pulling Sarah away from me. She fought against them, her pregnant belly making her movements awkward and desperate. "No, you can't do this. Tom, tell them. Tell them about our love, about our family." As the officers restrained her, securing her hands behind her back, a wave of pity washed over me. Beneath the fear and revulsion, I felt a deep sadness for the woman I had once loved. How had she fallen so far into delusion? "Sarah," I said softly, "there is no baby. We're not together. This has to stop." Her face crumpled at my words, tears streaming down her cheeks. But then, just as quickly, her expression hardened into one of determination. "You're lying," she spat. "You're just scared. But I'll prove it to you. I'll prove our love is real." As the officers began to lead her away, Sarah's screams echoed through the apartment. "You can't abandon us, Tom. We need you. Your baby needs you." I watched, a mix of emotions churning in my gut, as Sarah was escorted out of my home. The female officer remained behind, her expression softening as she turned to me. "Sir, are you all right? We'll need to take your statement." I nodded numbly, suddenly feeling the weight of exhaustion pressing down on me. The adrenaline that had been coursing through my veins began to ebb, leaving me shaky and drained. Over the next hour, I recounted everything to the officer: the pregnancy test, the strange occurrences in my apartment, the hidden cameras, and finally, today's confrontation. As I spoke, the reality of the situation began to sink in. "How?" I paused, swallowing hard. "How did you know to come?" I hadn't called yet. The officer gave me a small smile. "Your neighbor called. Said she heard a woman's voice in your apartment when you were supposed to be at work. Given your recent reports about a stalker, we decided to check it out immediately." I made a mental note to thank Mrs. Abernathy next door. Her nosiness, which had often annoyed me in the past, had possibly saved my life today. As the officer finished taking my statement, she placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "We'll need you to come down to the station later to sign some papers. For now, try to get some rest. It's over." But even as she said those words, a nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach told me it wasn't over, not by a long shot. After the police left, I stood in the middle of my bedroom, surveying the chaos. The splintered front door, the rumpled bed sheets where Sarah had sat, the closet where I had hidden in terror. It all seemed surreal, like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I sank onto the edge of the bed, my head in my hands. The events of the day replayed in my mind. Sarah's delusional ramblings, the look in her eyes as she was taken away, her screams about our non-existent baby. A sob caught in my throat, surprising me. Despite everything, despite the fear and violation, a part of me mourned for the Sarah I had once known, the vibrant, loving woman who had stolen my heart years ago. Where had that Sarah gone? And how had I missed the signs of her descent into madness? As exhaustion and emotional turmoil overwhelmed me, I lay back on the bed, not bothering to change clothes or clean up the mess. The nightmare seemed to be over, but as I drifted into an uneasy sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a much darker chapter in my life. The days following Sarah's arrest blurred together in a haze of police statements, lawyer consultations, and sleepless nights. I had my locks changed, installed a state-of-the-art security system, and even considered moving to a new apartment. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling of violation that clung to every corner of my home. Night after night, I found myself lying awake, staring at the ceiling, every creak and groan of the building sending my heart racing. Even with the new locks, I'd often get up multiple times to check the doors and windows, paranoia gnawing at the edges of my mind. "You're safe now," I'd mutter to myself, a mantra that felt increasingly hollow with each repetition. "She's gone. You're safe." But safety felt like a distant concept, a luxury I could no longer afford. A week after the incident, I received a call from the detective handling Sarah's case. Her voice was gentle, almost pitying, as she delivered the news. "Mr. Thompson, I wanted to update you on Sarah Miller's situation," she began. "She's been evaluated by psychiatrists and, well, her mental state is quite fragile. They've recommended she be placed in a psychiatric facility for treatment." I felt a knot form in my stomach. Is the baby?" The detective sighed. "Mr. Thompson, there is no baby. The pregnancy was a phantom pregnancy, a delusion. Sarah truly believed she was pregnant, but it was all in her mind." The news hit me like a physical blow. I sank onto my couch, my free hand gripping the armrest. How... how did I not see this coming? I whispered, more to myself than to the detective. Mental illness can be insidious, Mr. Thompson. It's not your fault. Sarah is getting the help she needs now. After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence, guilt gnawing at me. How had I missed the signs? Could I have prevented this if I'd paid more attention, if I'd been more understanding? The next day, I began the process of removing all traces of Sarah's intrusions from my apartment. I threw away the sheets she had touched, the mug she had drunk from, even the toothbrush I had replaced after finding it wet. As I worked, I felt a strange emptiness settling over me. It's for the best, I told myself as I tossed another item into a garbage bag. You need to move on. But each discarded object felt like erasing a part of my own history, a chapter of my life I was desperately trying to forget. As weeks passed without incident, a tentative sense of normalcy began to return. I went back to work, started socializing with friends again, even considered dating. But the paranoia lingered, a constant undercurrent to my daily life. I found myself constantly checking over my shoulder, scanning crowds for a familiar face, tensing at the sound of footsteps behind me. Even in my own home, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. One evening, about a month after Sarah's arrest, I was having dinner with my best friend, Mike. He watched with concern as I checked the locks for the third time since he'd arrived. "Tom, man, you've got to relax," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "Sarah's getting help. She can't hurt you anymore." I sank into my chair, running a hand through my hair. I know. It's just... I can't stop thinking about it. About her. What if she gets out? What if she comes back? Mike leaned forward, his expression serious. "Look, I get it. What you went through was traumatic. But you can't let it control your life. Have you considered talking to someone? A therapist, maybe?" I scoffed, but the idea took root. Maybe talking to someone would help. Maybe it would allow me to finally put this chapter behind me. The next day, I made an appointment with a therapist specializing in trauma and stalking victims. As I hung up the phone, a mix of relief and unease washed over me. It felt like a step forward, but also an admission that what had happened had affected me more deeply than I wanted to admit. That night, as I lay in bed, I found myself thinking of Sarah. Not the Sarah who had broken into my home, but the Sarah I had first fallen in love with. I wondered where that woman had gone, at what point she had been lost to the delusions that now consumed her. "I hope you find peace, Sarah," I whispered into the darkness. "I hope we both do." As I drifted off to sleep, I felt a weight lift slightly from my shoulders. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but for the first time in weeks I felt a glimmer of hope. Little did I know this moment of peace was merely the calm before a storm that would shake the very foundations of my world. The true test of my resilience was yet to come, and it would arrive in a form I could never have anticipated. As the weeks turned into months, I slowly began to reclaim my life. The therapy sessions helped, giving me tools to manage my anxiety and paranoia. I started sleeping through the night more often, the nightmares becoming less frequent. But just as I was starting to believe that the worst was behind me, fate had one more cruel twist in store. A twist that would force me to confront not only my past with Sarah, but also challenge everything I thought I knew about myself and my future. The day that would change everything started like any other. I woke up, went to work, and returned home, following the routine that had become my anchor in the chaos of the past few months. But as I checked my mail, a letter with an official-looking seal caught my eye. My hands trembled as I opened it, a sense of foreboding washing over me. As I read the contents, my world tilted on its axis once again. The letter was from the psychiatric facility where Sarah was being treated. The shrill ring of my phone pierced the quiet of my apartment, startling me from my morning routine. I glanced at the caller ID, my heart skipping a beat when I saw it was from the hospital where Sarah was being treated. With a shaking hand, I answered. "Mr. Thompson?" A crisp, professional voice inquired. "Yes, this is he," I replied, my mouth suddenly dry. This is Dr. Reeves from St. Mary's Hospital. I'm calling regarding Sarah Miller. She's given birth. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. I'm sorry, what? I stammered, certain I had misheard. Ms. Miller has given birth to a healthy baby boy, Dr. Reeves continued, her voice tinged with what sounded like confusion. She's insistent that you're the father. I felt the blood drain from my face. That's impossible, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. We haven't been together in over a year. And her pregnancy, it was supposed to be a delusion. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Mr. Thompson, I understand this is shocking news, but given the circumstances, we've taken the liberty of running a DNA test. The results, well, they confirm that you are indeed the biological father. The phone slipped from my grasp, clattering to the floor. I stood there frozen as Dr. Reeves's voice called out faintly from the fallen device. After what felt like an eternity, I managed to pick up the phone. I'm sorry, I don't understand, I said, my voice trembling. How is this possible? Dr. Reeves sighed. Mr. Thompson, given Ms. Miller's history of breaking into your apartment, we believe she may have collected your DNA during one of these intrusions. The conception appears to have been achieved through artificial insemination. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled to the bathroom, barely making it in time as I emptied the contents of my stomach into the toilet. The violation I had felt before paled in comparison to this new horror. As I rinsed my mouth, staring at my pale reflection in the mirror, a storm of emotions raged within me. Anger at Sarah for this ultimate betrayal, confusion over how this could have happened right under my nose, fear of the responsibilities suddenly thrust upon me, and underneath it all, a tiny flicker of something I couldn't quite name. Curiosity? Wonder? I called in sick to work, spending the day pacing my apartment, my mind racing. What was I supposed to do now? I had never wanted children, had made that clear to Sarah from the beginning. But now there was a child, my child, waiting at the hospital. A child born of deception and mental illness, but innocent in all of this. As the sun began to set, I knew I couldn't put it off any longer. I had to go to the hospital, had to see for myself. The drive to St. Mary's was a blur. Before I knew it, I was standing in front of the maternity ward, my feet feeling like lead as I approached the nurse's station. I'm here to see Sarah Miller's baby, I managed to say, the words feeling foreign on my tongue. The nurse looked up, her eyes widening slightly in recognition. Oh, Mr. Thompson. Yes, Dr. Reeves is expecting you. Follow me, please. She led me down a long corridor, the antiseptic smell of the hospital making my stomach churn. We stopped in front of a large window behind which rows of newborns lay in their bassinets. There, the nurse said softly, pointing to a bassinet in the front row. Baby boy Miller. I stepped closer to the glass, my heart pounding. The infant was tiny, his skin still red and wrinkled. A shock of dark hair, my hair, covered his head. As I watched, he yawned, his little fists waving in the air. Would you like to hold him? A voice asked from behind me. I turned to see Dr. Reeves, her expression a mixture of sympathy and concern. I opened my mouth to say no, to explain that I couldn't possibly be a father, that this was all a huge mistake. But what came out instead was a shaky yes. Minutes later, I found myself seated in a rocking chair, a nurse carefully placing the newborn in my arms. He was lighter than I expected, and so fragile. I looked down at his face, searching for, what? A connection? A sign? The baby's eyes fluttered open, unfocused but seeming to look right at me, and in that moment something shifted inside me. This child, regardless of how he came to be, was a part of me, innocent and helpless, needing protection and love. Hello, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. I'm your dad. Dr. Reeves cleared her throat gently. Mr. Thompson, I know this is overwhelming. There are decisions to be made, paperwork to fill out. But for now, take your time. Get to know your son. My son. The words echoed in my head, terrifying and exhilarating all at once. As I sat there, rocking gently and feeling the warm weight of the baby in my arms, I knew my life had changed irrevocably. The path ahead was unclear, fraught with legal, ethical, and emotional challenges. But looking down at this innocent life, I made a silent vow. I don't know how we're going to do this, I murmured to the sleeping infant. But I promise, I'll figure it out. We'll figure it out together. The sun had long since set by the time I left the hospital, my mind reeling with information about feeding schedules, pediatrician appointments, and social services meetings. As I drove home, the enormity of what lay ahead began to sink in. I was a father now, thrust into the role by circumstances I could never have imagined. The journey ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges I wasn't sure I was ready for. But as I remembered the feeling of my son in my arms, I felt a resolve hardening within me. Whatever came next, I would face it, for myself, and for the innocent life that now depended on me. The drive home from the hospital was a blur, my mind racing with thoughts and emotions I couldn't begin to process. As I walked into my apartment, the silence that greeted me felt different now. No longer a comfort, but a stark reminder of how unprepared I was for what lay ahead. I sank onto the couch, my head in my hands. The image of the baby, my son, kept flashing before my eyes. So small, so innocent, so completely unaware of the chaos surrounding his entrance into the world. What am I going to do? I whispered into the empty room. Sleep eluded me that night. I tossed and turned, my mind a battleground of conflicting emotions. Anger at Sarah for her deception warred with a growing sense of responsibility for the child. By the time dawn broke, I was no closer to a decision. The next day, I found myself back at the hospital. As I approached the nursery, a nurse I recognized from yesterday greeted me with a warm smile. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson. Would you like to see your son?" The words still felt strange to hear. My son. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. As I stood by the bassinet looking down at the sleeping infant, a wave of emotion washed over me. This child was a part of me, regardless of how he came to be. He was innocent in all of this, a victim of circumstances beyond his control. "Would you like to hold him?" the nurse asked gently. I hesitated for a moment before nodding. As she placed the baby in my arms, I felt a surge of protectiveness I'd never experienced before. He was so small, so vulnerable, and he needed me. "Hey there, little guy," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. I'm your dad." As if in response, the baby's eyes fluttered open, unfocused but seeming to look right at me. In that moment, something shifted inside me. A connection I never expected to feel blossomed, fragile but undeniable. Dr. Reeves approached, her expression sympathetic. "Mr. Thompson, I know this is an overwhelming situation. Have you given any thought to what you want to do?" The weight of the decision before me felt crushing. To embrace fatherhood, to take on the responsibility of raising this child, or to walk away, to maintain the life I had always planned for myself. Both options seemed equally terrifying. I don't know, I admitted, my eyes never leaving the baby's face. I never wanted to be a father, but now that he's here, Dr. Reeves nodded understandingly. It's a lot to process, but remember, you don't have to make any permanent decisions right away. The important thing is to consider what's best for the child. As I continued to hold my son, a memory surfaced. The look in Sarah's eyes when she was arrested, the desperation and delusion that had driven her to such extremes. A surge of determination welled up inside me. This child deserved better. He deserved a chance at a normal life, free from the trauma and chaos that had marked his conception. "I want to break the cycle," I said, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. "I want to give him a chance at the life Sarah couldn't provide." Dr. Reeves smiled. That's a noble goal, Mr. Thompson, but it won't be easy. Are you prepared for the challenges ahead? I took a deep breath, looking down at the baby in my arms. I don't know if I'm prepared, but I'm willing to try. Over the next few hours, I spoke with social workers, lawyers, and child care specialists. The road ahead would be difficult. Legal battles, custody arrangements, the monumental task of raising a child as a single father. But with each passing moment, my resolve strengthened. As the day drew to a close, I found myself once again holding my son. This time, instead of fear and uncertainty, I felt a growing sense of purpose. I don't have all the answers, I whispered to him. I'm probably going to make a lot of mistakes, but I promise you this. I will always be here for you. We'll figure this out together. Just then, a soft knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. I looked up to see a woman in a suit, her expression serious. Mr. Thompson, I'm Amanda Chen from Child Protective Services. We need to discuss the next steps regarding your son's care. I nodded, carefully standing up with the baby still in my arms. Of course, what do we need to do? Ms. Chen's eyes softened slightly as she saw how I cradled the child. Well, given the unusual circumstances of his birth and Ms. Miller's current condition, we need to ensure that you're prepared to provide a stable home environment. There will be home visits, parenting classes, and regular check-ins. I understand, I said, my voice firm. I'm ready to do whatever it takes. She nodded approvingly. That's good to hear. Now, have you thought about a name for him? We'll need it for the birth certificate. I paused, looking down at the baby's face. In all the chaos, I hadn't even considered a name. But as I gazed at him, a sense of calm settled over me. Benjamin, I said softly. Benjamin Thomas Thompson. Ms. Chen smiled. That's a lovely name. Now let's sit down and go over what you can expect in the coming weeks. As we talked, I felt a mix of emotions: fear, excitement, determination. The path ahead would be challenging, filled with obstacles I couldn't even imagine yet. But looking at Benjamin, peacefully sleeping in my arms, I knew it was a journey worth taking. The sun was setting as I prepared to leave the hospital. A nurse helped me secure Benjamin in the car seat I had hastily purchased that morning. As I drove home, our home now, I felt a sense of purpose I'd never experienced before. All right, Benjamin, I said, glancing at him in the rearview mirror. Let's go home and start our new life together. The apartment that had seemed so empty just days ago now held the promise of a future I never expected. As I carried Benjamin inside, I knew that nothing would ever be the same. But for the first time since this whirlwind began, I felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. This was just the beginning of our story, Benjamin's and mine. And despite the unconventional and traumatic circumstances that brought us together, I was determined to make it a story of love, growth, and healing. We had a long road ahead, but we would walk it together, step by step, day by day. The drive home from the hospital was a surreal experience. Every few minutes I found myself glancing in the rearview mirror, still half expecting to wake up and find this had all been a dream. But there he was, Benjamin Thomas Thompson, my son, securely fastened in his car seat, sleeping peacefully as we navigated the city streets. As I pulled into the parking lot of my apartment complex, a wave of anxiety washed over me. This place had been my bachelor pad, a space I'd cultivated for my single lifestyle. Now, in the span of a few days, it needed to transform into a home for a newborn. Well, buddy, I said softly, lifting the car seat out of the car. Welcome home. It's not much, but we'll make it work. The moment I stepped through the door, the reality of the situation hit me full force. My living room, once a testament to minimalist design and state-of-the-art entertainment systems, now looked woefully unprepared for a baby. The coffee table's sharp corners suddenly seemed like death traps, and the pristine white couch a canvas for future stains. I set the car seat down gently, careful not to wake Benjamin. Okay, I muttered to myself, running a hand through my hair. We've got some work to do. Over the next few hours, I threw myself into the task of baby-proofing the apartment. I moved breakables to high shelves, covered electrical outlets, and pushed the coffee table against the wall. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. As evening approached, I stood in the center of what used to be my home office, now hastily converted into a makeshift nursery. The crib I had frantically ordered online had arrived just in time, along with a changing table and a rocking chair. The walls, once adorned with modern art prints, now bore hastily hung pictures of cartoon animals. "It's not exactly Better Homes and Gardens," I said to Benjamin, who was awake now and looking around with unfocused curiosity. "But it'll do for now." As I placed him in the crib for the first time, a fierce wave of protectiveness washed over me. This tiny human, so innocent and vulnerable, was now my responsibility. I vowed then and there to shield him from the harsh realities of his conception for as long as possible. "I promise you, Ben," I whispered, gently stroking his cheek. "I'll do everything I can to give you a normal, happy life." The first night was a baptism by fire. Benjamin woke every 2 hours like clockwork, his cries piercing through the quiet apartment. Each time I stumbled out of bed, a mixture of exhaustion and adrenaline coursing through my veins as I prepared a bottle or changed a diaper. By the time dawn broke, I was a zombie, running on nothing but coffee and sheer determination. As I cradled Benjamin during his 6 a.m. feeding, I couldn't help but marvel at how much my life had changed in such a short time. "You know, little man," I said, stifling a yawn, "a few months ago, my biggest worry was whether I'd make partner at the firm this year. Now my whole world revolves around you." A bittersweet melancholy washed over me as I reflected on the life I had left behind. The late nights at the office, the weekends spent golfing with colleagues, the freedom to travel on a whim, all of it seemed like a distant memory now. But as I looked down at Benjamin, his tiny hand wrapped around my finger as he drifted off to sleep, I felt a new emotion bloom in my chest. Hope. The future I had always envisioned for myself might be gone, but in its place was the possibility of something I had never considered: a life filled with the joys and challenges of fatherhood. The days that followed were a blur of diaper changes, feedings, and stolen moments of sleep. My apartment slowly but surely transformed, baby items gradually taking over every surface. The sleek entertainment center now housed a collection of colorful toys, and the fridge was covered in notes about feeding schedules and pediatrician appointments. One evening, about a week after bringing Benjamin home, I found myself pacing the living room, trying to soothe his inconsolable cries. Nothing seemed to work. Not the bottle, not the diaper change, not the gentle rocking. "Come on, buddy," I pleaded, my voice tinged with desperation. "Work with me here. What do you need?" As if in response, Benjamin's cries intensified. I felt a moment of panic, the weight of my inexperience crushing down on me. What if I couldn't do this? What if I wasn't cut out to be a father? Just then, my phone rang. It was Mike, my best friend, checking in as he had been doing daily since Benjamin came home. "Hey man, how's it going?" he asked, his voice cheerful. "Not great," I admitted, the sound of Benjamin's cries clearly audible over the phone. "I can't get him to stop crying. I've tried everything, Mike. I don't know what to do." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Have you tried singing to him?" I blinked, surprised by the suggestion. "Singing? Mike, you know I can't carry a tune to save my life." Mike chuckled. "Trust me, the kid doesn't care if you sound like Pavarotti or a dying cat. It's about the rhythm and the closeness, just try it." Feeling slightly foolish, I began to hum the first song that came to mind, an old lullaby my mother used to sing to me. To my amazement, Benjamin's cries began to soften. Encouraged, I started to sing the words, my voice shaky and off-key but filled with love. "Hush, little baby, don't say a word, Daddy's gonna buy you a mockingbird." As I sang, gently swaying back and forth, Benjamin's cries tapered off into soft whimpers, and then finally, blissful silence. I looked down to find him fast asleep, his little face peaceful. "Mike," I whispered into the phone. It worked. He's asleep. See? Told you, Mike replied, the smile evident in his voice. You've got this, Tom. One day at a time. As I carefully laid Benjamin in his crib, I felt a sense of accomplishment wash over me. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. For the first time since bringing him home, I truly believed that I could do this. The weeks turned into months, and slowly but surely we fell into a routine. The sleepless nights became less frequent, and I found myself becoming more confident in my role as a father. Benjamin grew and changed at an astonishing rate, each new milestone filling me with a pride I had never experienced before. One lazy Sunday afternoon, as I sat in the rocking chair feeding Benjamin his bottle, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought us here. The fear, the anger, the confusion, all of it seemed to fade in the face of the love I felt for this little boy. You know, Ben, I said softly, your arrival in my life wasn't exactly conventional. In fact, it was pretty scary at first. But now I can't imagine my life without you. Benjamin looked up at me with his big blue eyes, a small smile playing on his lips. In that moment, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The circumstances of his conception, the trauma of the past few months, none of it mattered. What mattered was the present and the future we would build together. As I burped him and prepared to put him down for his nap, I couldn't help but marvel at how life had a way of surprising you. From the darkest, most unexpected situations, light could emerge. All right, little man, I said, placing a gentle kiss on his forehead as I laid him in his crib. Sweet dreams. Daddy loves you. I stood there for a moment, watching as Benjamin drifted off to sleep. The nursery, once a hastily converted office, now felt like the heart of our home. The walls were adorned with photos of our little family, Benjamin and me at the park, at his first doctor's appointment celebrating his first smile. As I quietly closed the nursery door, I caught sight of myself in the hallway mirror. The man staring back at me was different from the one who had first brought Benjamin home. There were dark circles under my eyes, yes, and my hair was in desperate need of a cut. But there was also a contentment in my expression that had never been there before. I made my way to the living room, sinking into the couch with a sigh. The coffee table was covered in parenting books, and a half-finished bottle sat next to a pile of clean burp cloths. It was a far cry from the meticulously organized space it had once been, but I wouldn't have it any other way. My phone buzzed with a text from Mike. "How's fatherhood treating you today?" I smiled, typing out a reply. "It's challenging, exhausting, and the best thing that's ever happened to me." As I hit send, I felt a surge of gratitude for the support system that had rallied around me and Benjamin. Mike, who had become an honorary uncle, always ready with advice or a helping hand. My parents, who had overcome their initial shock to embrace their new role as grandparents with enthusiasm. Even my colleagues at work, who had been understanding of my need for a more flexible schedule. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges to face, milestones to celebrate, and difficult conversations to have when Benjamin was old enough to understand the circumstances of his birth. But as I sat there, listening to the soft sounds of my son's breathing over the baby monitor, I felt ready to face whatever came our way. From the ashes of a traumatic experience, a new life had bloomed. Not just Benjamin's, but mine as well. We were a family, unconventional as it may be, and we had a whole future ahead of us to explore together. As the afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow over the room, I closed my eyes and allowed myself a moment of pure contentment. This was not the life I had planned, but it was a life filled with love, purpose, and endless possibilities. And for that, I was profoundly grateful. The manila envelope sat on my desk, innocuous yet foreboding. I'd been staring at it for hours, my hand reaching out to open it only to pull back at the last second. The clock on the wall ticked relentlessly, each second bringing me closer to a truth I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "Dad, are you okay?" I jumped at the sound of my daughter's voice. Emily stood in the doorway, her brow furrowed with concern. At 15, she was the spitting image of her mother, Sarah. Or so I'd always thought. I'm fine, sweetheart, I lied, forcing a smile. Just some boring paperwork. Emily nodded, unconvinced. Okay. Well, dinner's ready when you are. As she turned to leave, I called out, Emily? She paused, looking back at me. I love you. You know that, right? A flicker of confusion crossed her face before she smiled. I love you too, Dad. The moment she was gone, I slumped in my chair, guilt gnawing at my insides. With trembling hands, I finally reached for the envelope. The DNA test results. A routine medical checkup had led to this moment, a casual suggestion from the doctor to undergo genetic testing for potential hereditary conditions. I tore open the envelope, my eyes scanning the document inside. The words blurred, but one phrase stood out in stark clarity. Probability of paternity, 0%. My world tilted on its axis. I read the line again and again, willing it to change, but the harsh truth remained unchanged. I wasn't the biological father of my children. Memories of Sarah flooded my mind. Her laugh, her smile, the way she'd look at me with such love. Had it all been a lie? I thought back to when we first met, to our whirlwind romance and quick marriage. She'd already been pregnant then, claiming it was a miracle given her previous fertility issues. I'd been so in love, so eager to start a family, that I'd never questioned it. Now, 15 years later, with Sarah 5 years in her grave, the truth came crashing down around me. I stumbled to the bathroom, barely making it to the toilet before emptying the contents of my stomach. As I rinsed my mouth, I caught sight of my reflection in the mirror. Bloodshot eyes stared back at me, belonging to a man I no longer recognized. John? My son's voice echoed from downstairs. Dinner's getting cold. I splashed water on my face, trying to compose myself. Coming, Michael, I called back, my voice surprisingly steady. Dinner was a blur. I watched Emily and Michael as if seeing them for the first time. Michael's blue eyes, so unlike my brown ones. Emily's auburn hair, a shade I'd always attributed to some long-lost relative on my side. How had I been so blind? Dad, can I go to Jake's house after dinner? Michael asked, pulling me from my thoughts. I blinked, focusing on my son. My son. Despite what the test said, he was still my son, wasn't he? Sure, I managed to say. Just be back by 10. Emily tilted her head, studying me. Are you sure you're okay, Dad? You've barely touched your food. I forced myself to take a bite that tastes like ash in my mouth. Just a bit under the weather, I lied again. The lies were piling up, threatening to suffocate me. After dinner, I retreated to my study, the DNA test results burning a hole in my desk drawer. I pulled out old photo albums, scrutinizing every picture of Sarah. Had there been signs I'd missed? Clues to her infidelity? But as I flipped through the pages, all I saw was love. Sarah gazing at me on our wedding day, her eyes shining with happiness. Sarah cradling newborn Emily and Michael, looking exhausted but radiant. Family vacations, birthday parties, ordinary moments filled with laughter and joy. How could all of this be built on a lie? I was so engrossed in the photos that I didn't hear Emily enter the room. Dad? Her voice made me jump for the second time that evening. What are you doing? I hastily closed the album. Just reminiscing, I said, hating how easily the half-truths now came to my lips. Emily's eyes fell on the open drawer where the DNA test results peeked out. Before I could stop her, she'd snatched the paper, her eyes widening as she read its contents. Dad, what is this? Her voice trembled. It says you're not... Emily, I can explain, I started, but the words died in my throat. How could I explain something I didn't understand myself? Emily's face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes. Is this why you've been acting so weird? You don't want us anymore? I was on my feet in an instant, pulling her into a tight embrace. No, sweetheart, no. That's not it at all. I love you and Michael more than anything in this world. Nothing will ever change that. She clung to me, her tears soaking my shirt. Then why did you get a DNA test? Didn't you want us to be yours? My heart shattered at her words. Of course I did. I do. You are mine, Emily. You and Michael are my children, regardless of what any test says. But even as I spoke the words, doubt crept in. If I wasn't their biological father, who was? And why had Sarah kept this secret? As Emily's sobs subsided, I gently pulled away, looking into her eyes that suddenly seemed foreign. We need to talk to your brother, I said softly. There's a lot we need to figure out. Emily nodded, wiping her tears. Are we going to be okay, Dad? I wished I could give her a definitive answer, but the truth was, I had no idea what the future held. Our family had been built on a foundation of love, but now that foundation was cracking. Could we survive this revelation? We're going to get through this together, I promised, hoping I could keep that promise. No matter what happens, no matter what we discover, we're a family. Nothing can change that. As we left the study to wait for Michael's return, I cast one last glance at the photo albums. The smiling faces of our past stared back at me, oblivious to the storm that was about to engulf us. I closed the door, leaving behind the memories of a simpler time, and stepped into an uncertain future. The revelation had shaken my world to its core, but it was only the beginning. Little did I know that this discovery would lead us down a path darker and more twisted than I could have ever imagined. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows across the living room floor. I sat surrounded by photo albums, each open to a different moment frozen in time. Sarah's face smiled up at me from every page, her eyes twinkling with a secret I now knew she'd carried to her grave. I picked up our wedding photo, studying Sarah's expression. Was that a flicker of guilt in her eyes? Or was I projecting my own doubts onto a past that could no longer defend itself? Dad? Michael's voice startled me out of my reverie. We're heading to school now. I looked up to see my children standing by the door, backpacks slung over their shoulders. Emily's eyes were red-rimmed from crying, while Michael looked confused and wary. Have a good day, I managed to say, my voice hoarse from a sleepless night of explanations and tears. As they turned to leave, an irrational fear gripped me. What if they didn't come back? What if they decided I wasn't their real father after all? Wait, I called out, causing them both to turn. I stumbled over to them, pulling them into a tight embrace. I love you both, so much. Never forget that. Michael squirmed uncomfortably. Dad, we know. We love you too, but we're going to be late. I reluctantly let them go, watching as they walked down the driveway. Emily glanced back, giving me a small, sad smile before they disappeared around the corner. The house fell silent, save for the ticking of the clock on the mantel. I wandered from room to room, each space filled with memories that now felt tainted. In the kitchen, I could almost hear the echo of laughter from countless family dinners. The living room still held the imprint of movie nights and board game battles. I paused by the bookshelf, my eyes drawn to a framed photo of Sarah holding newborn Emily and Michael, my twins. Or were they? The doubt that had taken root in my mind grew with each passing moment. As I reached for the frame, a book tumbled from the shelf. I bent to pick it up, recognizing it as one of Sarah's old medical textbooks from her days as a nursing student. A slip of paper peeked out from between its pages. With trembling hands, I opened the book. It was a letter, dated just before we met. Dear Sarah, your participation in the fertility study has been approved. Please report to the clinic on Monday to begin the procedure. Remember, discretion is of utmost importance. Dr. A. Hoffman. My knees buckled and I sank to the floor, the letter clutched in my hand. A fertility study? Was this the answer to the mystery that had upended our lives? The rest of the day passed in a haze of confusion and mounting dread. When Emily and Michael returned from school, their laughter echoing through the house, I flinched at the sound. Each moment of normalcy felt like a lie, a performance I was no longer sure I could maintain. "Dad?" Emily's voice was tentative as she approached me in the study. "Can we talk?" I nodded, gesturing for her to sit. She perched on the edge of the chair, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. I told Michael about the DNA test," she confessed, her eyes downcast. A mix of relief and anxiety washed over me. "How did he take it?" Emily shrugged. "He's confused, angry. He wants to know why Mom would lie to us." "I want to know that too," I murmured, more to myself than to her. "Dad?" Emily's voice quavered. Are you going to try to find our real father?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I looked at my daughter because despite everything, she was still my daughter, and saw the fear and uncertainty in her eyes. "Emily," I said, reaching out to take her hand. I was surprised to find myself flinching at the contact, guilt washing over me at my involuntary reaction. "I don't know what's going to happen next, but I promise you, no matter what we discover, I am your father. Biology doesn't change that." She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I'm scared, Dad. Everything feels different now." I pulled her into a hug, ignoring the voice in my head that whispered of betrayal and lies. "I know, sweetheart. I'm scared too. But we'll figure this out together." As Emily left the room, I turned back to my desk, my eyes landing on the bottom drawer, where I'd hastily shoved Sarah's old diaries earlier. I'd been avoiding them, afraid of what secrets they might hold. But now, with the weight of my children's pain and confusion pressing down on me, I knew I couldn't put it off any longer. With shaking hands, I pulled out the oldest diary, its cover worn and pages yellowed with age. I opened it to the first entry, dated just a few months before Sarah and I met. I did it. I signed up for the fertility study. Dr. Hoffman says it's cutting edge, that it could help countless women struggling to conceive. But I can't shake this feeling of unease. What am I really signing up for? My heart raced as I flipped through the pages, each entry revealing more about the mysterious study. Sarah wrote of daily injections, strange tests, and cryptic conversations with doctors who never gave straight answers. And then, an entry that made my blood run cold. "I'm pregnant. It worked. But Dr. Hoffman says I can never tell anyone about the study. He says it's crucial that the children grow up without knowing." Children. Plural. How can he be so sure? I slammed the diary shut, my mind reeling. Sarah had known from the beginning. She'd participated in some kind of experimental fertility treatment, one shrouded in secrecy and ethical ambiguity. The sound of breaking glass jolted me from my thoughts. I rushed to the kitchen to find Michael standing amidst the shards of a shattered plate, his face a mask of anger and pain. "Why?" he shouted as I entered. "Why would she lie to us? To you?" I approached him carefully, mindful of the broken ceramic. "I don't know, Michael, but I promise you, we're going to find out." As I helped him clean up the mess, my mind raced with the implications of Sarah's diary. This wasn't just about infidelity or a moment of weakness. This was something bigger, something potentially dangerous. That night, as the house settled into an uneasy quiet, I sat in my study, surrounded by Sarah's diaries and old photos. The life I thought I knew lay in pieces around me, like the shattered plate in the kitchen. But as I looked at a photo of Sarah holding our newborn twins, I made a silent vow. I would uncover the truth, no matter where it led. For Emily and Michael, for the memory of the woman I loved, and for myself. The imposing facade of St. Mary's Hospital loomed before me, its sterile white walls a stark contrast to the turmoil raging within my mind. I stood on the sidewalk, my feet refusing to move, as if they understood the gravity of what awaited me inside. "Mr. Thompson?" A voice startled me from my paralysis. I turned to see a middle-aged woman in a lab coat, her kind eyes tinged with concern. "I'm Dr. Evelyn Carter. We spoke on the phone." I nodded, unable to find my voice. Dr. Carter gently guided me towards the entrance, her hand on my elbow providing an anchor I didn't know I needed. As we walked through the antiseptic halls, the weight of Sarah's diary entries pressed against my chest, where I'd tucked the most revealing pages into my jacket pocket. Each step brought me closer to answers I both craved and dreaded. Dr. Carter led me into a small conference room, gesturing for me to take a seat. Before we begin, Mr. Thompson, I want you to know that what I'm about to share with you is highly classified. You'll need to sign this non-disclosure agreement. She slid a document across the table. I stared at it, my mind reeling. I don't understand. I'm here about my wife, about my children. What could possibly require this level of secrecy? Dr. Carter's expression softened. John. May I call you John? What your wife participated in wasn't just a fertility study. It was something far more experimental. With trembling hands, I signed the document. Dr. Carter nodded, then pressed a button on an intercom. Moments later, an older man entered the room, his silver hair and piercing blue eyes immediately commanding attention. John, this is Dr. Alexander Hoffman. He was the lead researcher on the project your wife participated in. Dr. Hoffman extended his hand, which I shook automatically, still struggling to process the situation. Mr. Thompson, I understand you've recently discovered some discrepancies regarding your children's paternity. The clinical way he referred to the revelation that had shattered my world ignited a spark of anger within me. Discrepancies? I spat. Is that what you call finding out the children I've raised for 15 years aren't biologically mine? Dr. Hoffman remained impassive. I understand your distress, but please let me explain. What followed was a blur of scientific jargon and ethical nightmares. Words like genetic manipulation, embryonic enhancement, and evolutionary acceleration swirled around me, each more horrifying than the last. Wait, I interrupted, my head spinning. Are you saying you modified my children before they were even born? Dr. Hoffman nodded solemnly. Your wife came to us unable to conceive. We offered her a chance not just at motherhood, but at contributing to the next step in human evolution. Bile rose in my throat. Evolution? They're children, not lab rats. They're more than that, Dr. Carter interjected softly. They're the first of their kind, enhanced humans with capabilities we're only beginning to understand. I slumped in my chair, the weight of their words crushing me. How many? I managed to croak out. How many other couples did you do this to? Dr. Hoffman and Dr. Carter exchanged a glance. There were 12 couples in total, Dr. Carter finally answered. Including your wife, only 3 of the women successfully carried to term. The room spun around me. The others? Miscarriages, Dr. Hoffman said, his clinical tone doing nothing to soften the blow. Or complications we hadn't anticipated. I stood abruptly, needing to move, to breathe. And the other 2 couples? The ones with successful pregnancies? One couple moved abroad shortly after the birth. We've lost contact with them, Dr. Carter explained. The other... She trailed off, looking to Dr. Hoffman. The other couple and their child died in a house fire 3 years ago. He finished, his voice finally betraying a hint of emotion. The implications hit me like a physical blow. Which makes my children the only known survivors of the experiment, yes, Dr. Hoffman confirmed. I gripped the back of my chair, my knuckles turning white. What exactly did you do to them? What should I be expecting? Dr. Carter stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. John, your children's DNA was enhanced to improve physical strength, cognitive abilities, and even potential lifespan. But the full extent of these enhancements won't be clear until they fully mature. They're already showing signs, Dr. Hoffman added. Exceptional academic performance, athletic prowess beyond their peers. Haven't you noticed? Of course I had noticed Emily's perfect grades, Michael's sports trophies. I had been so proud. believing they had inherited the best of Sarah and me. Now I realized with a sickening lurch, those achievements were the result of manipulation in a lab. Why? I demanded, rounding on Dr. Hoffman. Why do this? Why lie to us? For the advancement of human potential, he replied, his eyes gleaming with a fervor that chilled me to the bone. Imagine a world where disease, cognitive decline, even aging itself could be eradicated. Your children are the first step towards that future. I shook my head, backing away. They're children, not your science experiment. They deserve a normal life. Normal? Dr. Hoffman scoffed. They were never going to be normal, Mr. Thompson. They're extraordinary, and as they grow, they'll need guidance, protection. No, I cut him off, a sudden clarity cutting through my confusion. What they need is to be left alone, to live their lives without you or anyone else interfering. Dr. Carter stepped between us, her hands raised placatingly. John, please. We understand this is a lot to process, but your children may develop abilities or needs that you're not equipped to handle. We can help. I turned to her, seeing the genuine concern in her eyes, but behind her, I saw Dr. Hoffman's calculating gaze, and I knew I couldn't trust them. I think we're done here, I said, moving towards the door. You've told me enough. Mr. Thompson, Dr. Hoffman called as I reached for the handle. This isn't over. Your children are too important to simply walk away from. I paused, turning back to face him. They're important to me. They're my children, and I'll do whatever it takes to protect them. From you, from anyone who thinks they can control their lives. With that, I stormed out of the room, out of the hospital, each step feeling like I was wading through quicksand. The bright sunlight outside was a shock to my system after the fluorescent glare of the hospital. I made it to my car before the full weight of what I'd learned came crashing down on me. Gasping for air, I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white as I fought against the rising panic. My children, my beautiful, brilliant children, were the products of an experiment that had claimed the lives of other couples, other babies, and now, they were the only ones left. As I drove home in a daze, my mind raced with questions. How would I tell Emily and Michael? Should I tell them at all? And what did their future hold? Would they develop strange abilities? Would they be in danger from those who wanted to study them? Pulling into our driveway, I caught sight of my reflection in the rearview mirror. The man staring back at me was a stranger, haggard, haunted, with eyes that had seen too much. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. One thing was clear: our lives would never be the same. But no matter what came next, I would protect my children. They may not be mine biologically, but they were mine in every way that mattered. As I walked into the house, the sound of Emily and Michael's laughter drifted from the kitchen. For a moment, everything felt normal, but I knew that normalcy was an illusion, one that had been shattered the moment I opened that DNA test result. The soft glow of the nightlight cast long shadows across Emily and Michael's sleeping faces. I stood in the doorway of their shared bedroom, my heart heavy with the weight of secrets. They looked so peaceful, so blissfully unaware of the storm brewing just beyond their dreams. I lingered there, watching the gentle rise and fall of their chests, torn between two impossible choices. On one hand, I yearned to protect them, to shield them from the harsh reality that threatened to shatter their world. On the other, I knew that the truth, no matter how painful, was their birthright. As I turned to leave, Michael stirred in his sleep, mumbling something incoherent. For a moment I froze, irrationally afraid that he might wake up different, changed somehow by the knowledge I now possessed. But he simply rolled over, his face relaxing back into peaceful slumber. I retreated to my own bedroom, knowing sleep would elude me yet again. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw accusing faces: Sarah's, Dr. Hoffman's, and worst of all, Emily and Michael's. In my nightmares, they looked at me with eyes that were no longer human, their voices a cacophony of inhuman shrieks demanding answers I couldn't give. I jolted awake, drenched in sweat, the echo of those dream cries still ringing in my ears. The alarm clock read 3:47 a.m. With a groan, I dragged myself out of bed, knowing there was no point in trying to sleep any longer. In the kitchen, I mechanically went through the motions of making coffee, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. As the rich aroma filled the air, I found myself reaching for the phone before I could second-guess myself. "Dr. Winters' office," a cheery voice answered after several rings. "Hi, this is John Thompson. I know it's early, but I was wondering if Dr. Winters had any availability today. It's urgent." There was a pause, then, "You're in luck, Mr. Thompson. We've had a cancellation for 10 a.m. Will that work for you?" I agreed, relief washing over me at the prospect of unburdening myself to someone, anyone, who might be able to help me navigate this ethical minefield. The morning passed in a blur of routine, making breakfast, packing lunches, seeing the kids off to school. As I watched them walk down the driveway, their backpacks bouncing with each step, I was struck by how normal everything looked on the surface. If only they knew the turmoil that lay beneath. At 10 a.m. sharp, I found myself sitting across from Dr. Winters, a kind-faced woman in her 50s who had been my therapist on and off for years. "John," she said warmly, "it's been a while. What brings you in today?" I took a deep breath, then began to speak. I told her everything: the DNA test, Sarah's diaries, the meeting at the hospital. As I spoke, Dr. Winters' expression shifted from concern to shock to something akin to disbelief. When I finally finished, she was silent for a long moment. "John," she said carefully, it's beyond anything I've ever encountered in my practice. I can only imagine how overwhelming this must be for you." I laughed bitterly. "Overwhelming doesn't begin to cover it, Doc. I don't know what to do. Do I tell them? Do I keep it a secret? How do I protect them from people who might want to study them or worse?" Dr. Winters leaned forward, her eyes filled with compassion. "John, there's no easy answer here, but I want you to consider something. Secrets have a way of coming out, often in the most damaging ways. Your children are intelligent, perceptive young people. They may already sense that something is amiss." "So you think I should tell them?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She sighed. "I think you need to seriously consider it. But John, whatever you decide, remember this: those children are yours. Biology doesn't define family. Love does." I left Dr. Winters' office feeling both lighter and heavier. Her words of advice echoed in my mind, but they were drowned out by the cacophony of my own fears and doubts. That evening, as we sat around the dinner table, Emily's voice cut through my distracted thoughts. "Dad, can I ask you something about Mom?" I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. "Of course, sweetheart. What do you want to know?" Emily hesitated, pushing her food around her plate. I was looking at old photos, and I realized I don't really remember much about her. What was she like when you first met?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I opened my mouth to respond, but the lies I'd been telling myself caught in my throat. How could I describe our whirlwind romance without mentioning the secret she'd been carrying? How could I paint a picture of the woman I thought I knew, when I now realized I might never have truly known her at all? "Your mother," I began, my voice thick with emotion, "was the most beautiful, compassionate person I've ever known. When we met, it was like the whole world suddenly made sense." Michael looked up from his plate, his eyes shining with interest. "How did you meet?" Another innocent question that felt like a dagger to my heart. I swallowed hard, fighting back the urge to tell them everything right then and there. "We met at a fundraiser," I said, the half-truth tasting bitter on my tongue. She was volunteering, and I was there with some colleagues. The moment I saw her, I knew she was special. Emily smiled softly. "That's romantic, Dad. I wish I could remember her better." As I looked at my children's faces, Filled with love and curiosity about the mother they barely remembered, I made my decision. They deserve to know the truth, no matter how difficult it might be to hear. "Listen," I said, setting down my fork. "There's something important I need to talk to you both about. Not tonight, but soon. It's about your mother and about our family." Emily and Michael exchanged worried glances. "Is everything okay, Dad?" Michael asked, his brow furrowed with concern. I forced a smile, trying to project a calm I didn't feel. "Everything's fine. It's just, there are some things you need to know, things that might be hard to understand at first, but I promise, no matter what, we're a family. Nothing will ever change that." As I looked at their confused, slightly frightened faces, I prayed that my words would prove true. In that moment, I made a silent vow to myself and to Sarah's memory. I would tell them the truth, but I would also protect them with every fiber of my being. They may have been born from an experiment, but they were my children, and nothing, not science, not genetics, not shadowy organizations, would ever change that fact. The next few days loomed before me, filled with both dread and a strange sense of relief. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with potential dangers and heartaches. But as I looked at Emily and Michael, I knew that whatever came next, we would face it together. They were my children, my family, and I would move heaven and earth to keep them safe and loved. As I cleared the dinner table that night, the weight of my decision settled over me like a heavy cloak. The truth was a double-edged sword, capable of setting us free or tearing us apart. But as I watched Emily and Michael laughing over a shared joke, I knew I had made the right choice. Our family was built on love, not lies, and it was time to honor that truth, no matter the cost. The attic air was thick with dust and memories as I rummaged through boxes of Sarah's old belongings. Each item I uncovered felt like a small betrayal, a piece of a life I thought I knew but now questioned entirely. A photo album caught my eye, its cover adorned with pressed flowers, Sarah's handiwork. I opened it gingerly, and a slip of paper fluttered to the floor. As I bent to retrieve it, my heart skipped a beat. It was a list of names and phone numbers, some crossed out, others circled. With trembling hands, I pulled out my phone and dialed the first number that wasn't crossed out. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3. "Hello?" A woman's voice, tired and wary, answered. I swallowed hard. "Hi, my name is John Thompson. I found your number in my late wife's things." "Sarah Thompson? Did you know her?" There was a long pause, then a sharp intake of breath. "Oh God, you're one of us, aren't you?" My grip on the phone tightened. I'm not sure what you mean." "The experiment," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Your wife, she was part of it too, wasn't she?" A chill ran down my spine. "Yes," I managed to say. Can we talk?" The woman, who introduced herself as Diane, agreed to meet me at a small cafe on the outskirts of town. As I drove there, my mind raced with questions. How many others were there? What did they know that I didn't? Diane was easy to spot, a petite woman with graying hair and haunted eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and heavy burdens. As I approached her table, she looked up, her gaze searching my face. "John?" she asked, and I nodded, taking a seat across from her. For a moment, we just stared at each other, two strangers bound by an unimaginable secret. "How much do you know?" Diane finally asked, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her coffee cup. I took a deep breath. "I know about the fertility experiment, about the genetic modifications. I know my children aren't biologically mine." Diane nodded slowly. "It's the same for all of us." "Well, those of us who survived." "Survived?" I echoed, a chill running down my spine. Diane's eyes darted around the cafe before she leaned in closer. "There were complications," she whispered. "Not just miscarriages. Some of the children, they weren't right. And some of the parents, when they found out the truth, She trailed off, but I could fill in the horrifying blanks. How many? I asked, dreading the answer. 12 couples started, Diane said, her voice hollow. As far as I know, only 4 of us are left. You, me, and 2 others. My mind reeled. And the children? Diane's eyes filled with tears. I lost mine, she said softly. They were born. Different. They didn't survive infancy. You're twins. They're the only ones left who made it past childhood. The weight of her words crashed over me. Emily and Michael weren't just special, they were unique. The sole survivors of an experiment gone horribly wrong. What about the other 2 couples? I asked, desperate for any information that might help me protect my children. Diane shook her head. One couple disappeared off the grid years ago. The other... She hesitated. There was a fire. They didn't make it. My blood ran cold as I remembered Dr. Hoffman mentioning a house fire. It wasn't an accident, was it? Diane's silence was answer enough. As we talked, Diane filled in more of the gaps in my knowledge. She spoke of secret meetings, of promises of miraculous cures and superhuman abilities. But mostly she spoke of fear. Fear of discovery. Fear for their children's lives. Fear of what they might become. Why did you agree to it? I asked, not accusingly, but with genuine curiosity. Diane's eyes grew distant. We were desperate, she said softly. Years of failed treatments, of watching everyone around us start families while we remained childless. When Dr. Hoffman approached us with his miracle cure, it seemed too good to be true. And it was. I nodded, understanding all too well the desperation that must have driven them. Hadn't I accepted Sarah's pregnancy as a miracle, never questioning the suddenness of it? As our conversation wound down, Diane reached into her purse and pulled out a worn notebook. Sarah gave me this, she said, sliding it across the table. She made us all keep journals, said it was important to document everything in case something happened. I took the notebook with trembling hands. Thank you, I whispered, feeling the weight of its secrets. Diane stood to leave, then paused. John, she said, her voice urgent. Be careful. They're still out there, the people behind the experiment. They won't let go of their success stories easily. As I watched her walk away, her words echoed in my mind. The conspiracy ran deeper than I had ever imagined, and my children were at the center of it all. Back home, I sat at my desk, Sarah's journal open before me. Her familiar handwriting filled the pages, a mix of scientific jargon and deeply personal reflections. One entry caught my eye. The twins moved today. It's still early, but I swear I can feel them growing stronger every day. What have we done? What kind of life will they have? John deserves to know the truth, but I'm terrified of losing him, of losing everything. God forgive me, but I can't give this up. Not now. Tears blurred my vision as I read Sarah's innermost thoughts. She had been scared, conflicted, but ultimately driven by the same desperate desire for a family that had led Diane and the others to participate in the experiment. A soft knock at the door startled me from my reverie. Dad? Emily's voice called out. Can I come in? I hastily wiped my eyes. Of course, sweetheart. Emily entered, her brow furrowed with concern. Are you okay? You've been acting strange ever since, well, since you told us about the DNA test. I looked at my daughter, my brilliant, beautiful, genetically modified daughter, and felt a surge of love and protectiveness. Come here, I said, patting the seat next to me. As Emily sat down, I took a deep breath. There's something I need to tell you and your brother. About your mother. About how you were born. It's not going to be easy to hear. Emily's eyes widened. Dad, you're scaring me. What's going on? I placed my hand over hers. I promise I'll explain everything, but I need you to understand that no matter what, you and Michael are my children. I love you more than anything in this world, and nothing will ever change that. As I looked into Emily's frightened, confused eyes, I knew that the truth I was about to reveal would change our lives forever. But I also knew that we would face whatever came next together, as a family. "Go get your brother," I said softly. "It's time you both knew the truth." As Emily left to fetch Michael, I steeled myself for the conversation ahead. The threads of our past were unraveling, revealing a tapestry far more complex and dangerous than I had ever imagined. But as I heard my children's footsteps approaching, I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, our love for each other would be our strength and our shield. The truth, no matter how painful, was the first step towards protecting them. The living room was bathed in the soft glow of the evening sun as I sat across from Emily and Michael. Their faces were a mix of curiosity and apprehension, sensing the weight of the moment. I took a deep breath, willing my racing heart to slow. "Kids," I began, my voice barely above a whisper, "there's something I need to tell you about your mother and about yourselves." Emily leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "Dad, you're scaring us. What's going on?" I closed my eyes for a moment, steeling myself. When I opened them, I saw Sarah in both their faces, and it nearly broke me. "Your mother, she participated in an experimental fertility treatment before you were born. It wasn't just any treatment, it was genetic modification." Michael's eyes widened. "Genetic modification? What are you talking about?" I swallowed hard. "The doctors, they altered your DNA before you were even born. To make you stronger, smarter, more resilient?" A heavy silence fell over the room. Emily was the first to break it, her voice trembling. "Are you saying we're... what? Some kind of experiments?" "No," I said quickly, reaching out to them, but they both flinched away. My hand fell limply to my side. "You're my children. You're extraordinary, but not because of what they did. Because of who you are." Michael stood abruptly, his face a mask of anger. "Is that why you got that DNA test? Because you knew we weren't really yours?" His words hit me like a physical blow. "No, Michael. I had no idea until..." "Until what?" Emily interrupted, her eyes flashing. "Until you found out we're freaks?" "You're not freaks," I pleaded. "You're my children. I love you more than anything in this world." "But we're not really yours, are we?" Michael spat. "You're not our real father." I felt as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. "Biology doesn't make a family," I said, my voice hoarse. "Love does. And I have loved you both every single day of your lives." Emily stood now too, tears streaming down her face. "How could Mom do this to us? How could you keep this from us?" "Your mother..." "She was desperate for a child," I explained, the words feeling hollow even as I spoke them. "And I didn't know until recently. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you." "By lying to us for weeks," Michael accused, "by acting weird and distant." I ran a hand through my hair, feeling utterly lost. "I was trying to protect you." "Protect us?" Emily laughed bitterly. "From what? The truth?" "There are people who might want to study you," I said, realizing how insane it sounded even as the words left my mouth. "The experiment you were part of, it was bigger than just us." Michael's face contorted in disgust. "So we're not just freaks, we're lab rats too." "No!" I stood, reaching for them again, but they both backed away. "You're my children. Nothing else matters." Emily shook her head, tears still falling. "Everything matters now, Dad. Our whole lives have been a lie." "Not a lie," I pleaded. "Just complicated." "Complicated?" Michael scoffed. "That's one way to put it." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see the wheels turning in their heads, processing this earth-shattering information. I wanted nothing more than to hold them, to assure them that everything would be okay, but the gulf between us seemed insurmountable. Finally, Emily spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "We need some time to think, to process." I nodded, my heart breaking. "Of course, whatever you need, just please know that I love you. Both of you. More than anything." They didn't respond. Instead, they turned and walked out of the living room, their footsteps echoing in the hallway. I heard their bedroom doors close, one after the other, and then silence. I collapsed onto the couch, my head in my hands. How had it all gone so wrong? I had wanted to protect them, to be honest with them, but instead, I had shattered their world. Hours passed. The house remained eerily quiet. I paced, I sat, I stood outside their doors, my hand raised to knock, only to lower it again, unsure of what I could possibly say to make this better. As dawn broke, I made my way to the kitchen, desperately in need of coffee. That's when I saw it. A note on the table written in Emily's neat handwriting. "Dad, we've gone to stay with Grandma and Grandpa for a while. We need space to think about everything. Please don't try to contact us. We'll reach out when we're ready. Emily and Michael." My legs gave out and I sank to the floor, the note clutched in my trembling hands. They were gone. My children, my reason for living, had left. The house felt cavernous, every room echoing with their absence. I wandered from Emily's room to Michael's, touching their belongings, breathing in their scents. How had I let this happen? In Michael's room, I found a framed photo of the four of us, Sarah, the twins, and me, taken just months before Sarah's death. We were all smiling, a perfect family portrait. Now it felt like a cruel mockery of the life we'd lost. I picked up the frame, tracing Sarah's face with my finger. "What do I do now?" I whispered to her image. "How do I fix this?" But Sarah's smiling face offered no answers, and the silence of the house pressed in on me, suffocating in its totality. As the day wore on, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the phone. Should I call my in-laws? Demand to speak to my children? But I knew that would only push them further away. They needed time, space. But every fiber of my being screamed to go to them, to hold them, to make them understand that they were loved, unconditionally and completely. The weight of secrets and lies hung heavy in the air. I had thought that telling the truth would set us free, but instead, it had torn us apart. As I sat there, alone in the echoing silence of our once happy home, I realized that the real battle was just beginning. Somewhere out there, my children were grappling with their new reality. And somewhere out there, the people behind the experiment that had created them were still watching, still waiting. I had to find a way to bring my family back together, to protect them from whatever dangers lurked in the shadows. But first I had to find a way to bridge the chasm that had opened between us. As the sun set on the longest day of my life, I made a silent vow. I would give them the space they needed, but I would never stop fighting for them. They were my children, experiment or no experiment, and I would move heaven and earth to bring them home. With trembling hands, I picked up Sarah's journal again. There had to be answers here. Something that would help me understand. Something that would help Emily and Michael understand. As I began to read, I silently prayed for the strength to face whatever challenges lay ahead, and for the wisdom to find a way back to my children's hearts. The house settled into an uneasy quiet, but my mind raced with possibilities and fears. This was far from over. It was, I realized, with a mix of dread and determination, only the beginning. The incessant ringing of my phone jolted me awake. Bleary-eyed, I fumbled for it, my heart skipping a beat when I saw it was Emily calling. "Emily?" I answered, my voice hoarse with sleep and hope. "Dad," she said, her tone urgent and scared. "Turn on the TV, now." Confused and alarmed, I stumbled to the living room and flicked on the television. My blood ran cold as I saw the headline scrolling across the bottom of the screen. "Breaking. Illegal genetic modification experiment uncovered." The news anchor's voice filled the room. In a shocking revelation, sources have come forward with evidence of an unauthorized genetic modification experiment conducted on human embryos over a decade ago. The experiment, allegedly aimed at creating enhanced humans, has raised serious ethical concerns and legal questions. "Oh God," I whispered, sinking onto the couch. "Dad?" Emily's voice crackled through the phone. "What do we do?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Where are you and Michael?" "Still at Grandma and Grandpa's," she replied. "They're freaking out, everyone's calling." "Listen to me," I said, forcing calm into my voice. "Stay there, don't talk to anyone. I'm coming to get you both." As I hung up, a thunderous knocking at the front door made me jump. I peeked through the curtains and my heart sank. A swarm of reporters had gathered on our front lawn, cameras flashing and microphones thrust forward. "Mr. Thompson," they shouted, "what can you tell us about the genetic modification experiment? Were your children part of it? How does it feel to know your kids are genetically enhanced?" I backed away from the window, my mind reeling. How had they found out? Who had leaked the information? My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. Not safe to call. Meet at the old factory on 5th, 1 hour. Jack." Jack. I vaguely remembered the name from Sarah's list. Another affected father. Ignoring the continued pounding at the door, I slipped out the back and made my way to my car. As I drove to the meet-up point, my eyes constantly darted to the rearview mirror, paranoia seeping into every pore. The old factory loomed before me, a decrepit relic of a bygone era. A figure emerged from the shadows as I approached. "John?" the man asked, his eyes darting nervously. I nodded. "Jack?" He ushered me inside quickly. In the dim light, I could see the toll this secret had taken on him. His face was gaunt, eyes sunken with exhaustion and fear. "They're coming for them," Jack said without preamble. "Our kids. They want to study them, contain them." "Who?" I demanded. "Who's coming for them?" Jack ran a trembling hand through his hair. "The people behind the experiment. Government agencies, private corporations, they all want a piece of the success stories." My mind raced. But how did this get out? We were sworn to secrecy. Jack's laugh was bitter. "Someone talked. Doesn't matter who now. What matters is keeping our kids safe." As we talked, Jack filled me in on what he knew. Whispers of black ops teams, of secret facilities designed to house and study genetically modified humans. It all sounded like a bad science fiction movie, but the fear in Jack's eyes was all too real. "What do we do?" I asked, feeling utterly lost. Jack handed me a burner phone and a thick envelope. "There's a network, other parents, sympathizers. We've been preparing for this day. Everything you need is in here. Instructions, contacts, safe houses." I took the items, my hand shaking. "I can't just disappear with my kids. Their lives are here." "Their lives are in danger," Jack snapped. "You think those reporters out there are the worst of it? They're just the beginning. The storm is coming, John, and it's going to sweep away everything in its path unless we act now." As I drove home, Jack's words echoed in my mind. The street seemed different now. Every shadow potentially hiding a threat. Every passing car a possible tale. When I arrived home, the media circus had grown. I pushed through the crowd, ignoring their shouted questions, and barricaded myself inside. As night fell, I noticed a car parked across the street. Its occupants made no effort to hide their surveillance of the house. My paranoia, already at a fever pitch, skyrocketed. I drew the curtains and began methodically securing every entrance. As I worked, my phone buzzed with messages from friends and colleagues, all asking about the news reports. I ignored them all, focused solely on the task at hand. In the quiet of the lockdown house, I opened the envelope Jack had given me. Inside was a veritable escape plan. New identities, offshore accounts, routes to safe houses across the country and beyond. The thoroughness of it all was both impressive and terrifying. As I pored over the documents, a new text came through on the burner phone. "They're moving. Get out now." My heart raced as I looked out the window again. The car was still there, but now its occupants were getting out, moving with purpose towards the house. With shaking hands, I dialed Emily's number. "Pack a bag," I said the moment she answered. "You and Michael. Only essentials. I'll be there in 30 minutes. "Dad, what's going on?" she asked, fear evident in her voice. "I'll explain everything soon," I promised. "But right now I need you to trust me. Can you do that?" There was a pause, then, "Okay, Dad, we trust you." As I hung up, I heard a noise at the back door. They were trying to get in. Adrenaline surging, I grabbed the go bag I'd prepared earlier and headed for the garage. As I started the car, I could hear the sound of breaking glass from inside the house. I peeled out of the garage, tires screeching. In the rearview mirror, I saw dark figures pouring out of the house, shouting and gesturing towards me. As I sped towards my in-laws' house, my mind raced with plans and contingencies. Everything had changed in the blink of an eye. Our private nightmare had become a public spectacle, and now unknown forces were closing in. But one thing remained constant: my love for my children and my determination to protect them at all costs. As I drove into the gathering storm, I silently vowed to keep them safe, no matter where this chaotic journey might lead us. The road stretched out before me, dark and uncertain. But for the first time in days, I felt a sense of purpose. The truth was out there, dangerous and frightening as it might be. Now, it was up to me to navigate this treacherous new reality and find a way to keep my family together and safe. With a final glance in the rearview mirror to ensure I wasn't being followed, I pressed down on the accelerator. Whatever came next, we would face it together. The experiment that had brought Emily and Michael into this world may have been the beginning of this nightmare, but I was determined it wouldn't be the end of our story. As the city lights faded behind me, I steeled myself for the challenges ahead. The gathering storm was upon us, but I would be damned if I let it tear my family apart. The safe house was a small, nondescript cabin on the outskirts of town. As I ushered Emily and Michael inside, the weight of our situation pressed down on me like a physical force. For 3 days we'd been on the move, staying one step ahead of, well, I wasn't even sure anymore. "Dad," Emily said, her voice tired and strained, "how long do we have to keep running?" I ran a hand through my disheveled hair, aware of how wild I must look. "I don't know, sweetheart. I'm just trying to keep us safe." Michael scoffed, throwing himself onto the worn couch. "Safe from what? The reporters? The government? Or are we hiding from the bogeymen you think are after us?" His words stung, but I couldn't blame him. In the chaos of our flight, I'd tried to explain everything: the experiment, the dangers, the need for secrecy. But with each passing hour, each new paranoid precaution, I could see doubt growing in their eyes. "It's all real," I insisted, peering out the window for the 100th time. "The experiment, the people after us. We have to stay alert." Emily placed a gentle hand on my arm. "Dad, maybe we should rest. You haven't slept properly in days." I shook my head, my eyes burning with exhaustion. "Can't sleep. Not safe." As night fell, the shadows in the cabin seemed to deepen, to move. I blinked hard, trying to clear my vision, but the darkness kept shifting, reaching out with tendrils of inky black. "Did you see that?" I asked sharply, pointing to a corner where I could have sworn I saw a shadow detach itself from the wall. Emily and Michael exchanged worried glances. "Dad, there's nothing there," Michael said slowly, as if speaking to a child. I rubbed my eyes furiously. "No, I saw it. We're not alone here." Unable to shake the feeling of being watched, I began a thorough search of the cabin. As I ran my hands along the walls and furniture, my fingers caught on something beneath the coffee table. My heart nearly stopped as I pried loose a tiny camera, no bigger than a button. "Oh God," I whispered, staring at the device in my palm. "They've been watching us all along." Emily approached cautiously. "Dad, what is that?" I thrust the camera at her. "Proof. They've been spying on us probably for years. Who knows how many more are hidden in here, in our house." Michael stood up, his face a mix of concern and frustration. "Dad, stop. You're scaring us. There's no they. You're seeing things that aren't there." But I was beyond reason now, tearing the cabin apart in search of more cameras. Each shadow, each creak of the old building sent my heart racing. They were coming for us, I was sure of it. As dawn broke, I slumped against the wall, surrounded by the debris of my frantic search. Emily and Michael stood before me, their expressions unreadable. "We need to go home, Dad," Emily said softly. This isn't right. I looked up at them, and for a moment I didn't recognize my own children. Their eyes seemed colder, somehow alien. Had the experiment changed more than just their genes? We can't go back, I insisted. It's not safe. Michael's voice was flat, emotionless. We're going home, Dad. With or without you. As they turned to pack their meager belongings, a chill ran down my spine. What had happened to my loving, trusting children? Had the stress of our situation changed them, or was something more sinister at work? We drove back in tense silence. As we approached our street, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Strange symbols were painted on our doorstep, glowing faintly in the early morning light. Wait here, I ordered, getting out of the car to investigate. The symbols were like nothing I'd ever seen before, a mix of angular lines and curved sigils that seemed to shift and move as I stared at them. My mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. Were we being targeted by some secret organization? Or was this something even darker beyond human understanding? Dad? Emily's voice snapped me back to reality. What is it? I turned to see my children standing behind me, their faces impassive as they looked at the symbols. Can't you see them? I asked, my voice rising in panic. The symbols, they're glowing. Michael and Emily exchanged glances. Dad, Michael said slowly, there's nothing there. The doorstep is clean. I whirled back around, but the symbols were gone. The concrete as bare and gray as ever. My mind reeled. Had I imagined it all? We entered the house, and I immediately began checking for hidden cameras, for any sign that we'd been watched or followed. Emily and Michael retreated to their rooms without a word, leaving me alone with my spiraling thoughts. As night fell, exhaustion finally overcame me. I collapsed into bed, my dreams a chaotic swirl of shadowy figures and glowing symbols. In the depths of sleep, I heard my bedroom door creak open. My eyes snapped open to find Emily and Michael standing at the foot of my bed, their faces obscured in darkness. I fumbled for the lamp, but no light came. Kids? I croaked, my throat dry with fear. What's wrong? They remained silent, unmoving. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I could make out their expressions. Blank, emotionless, their eyes reflecting an otherworldly light. We know the truth now, Dad, Emily said, her voice oddly distorted. Michael nodded. We understand what we are, what we're meant to be. I sat up, my heart pounding. What are you talking about? They spoke in unison, their voices blending into an eerie harmony. The experiment wasn't a mistake. It was a beginning. And now, it's time for the next phase. As they stepped closer, I pressed myself against the headboard, terror gripping me. What had happened to my children? What had they become? Stay back, I whispered. But they kept advancing, their eyes now glowing with an unnatural light. Emily reached out a hand, her fingers elongated and strange. Don't be afraid, Dad. You'll understand soon. We all will. As their cold hands touched my skin, I jerked awake with a strangled cry. Sunlight streamed through the windows, and I was alone in my room. Shaking, I stumbled out of bed and down the hall to my children's rooms. I found them sleeping peacefully, looking as normal and innocent as ever. But as I watched them, doubt gnawed at me. Had it all been a nightmare? Or was there something lurking beneath the surface, waiting to emerge? I retreated to the kitchen, my mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. As I clutched a cup of coffee with trembling hands, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had crossed a threshold. The experiment that had brought my children into this world was far from over, and the darkness it had unleashed was only beginning to reveal itself. Outside, the world continued as normal, oblivious to the terror that had taken root in our home. But inside, in the shadows of my fractured psyche and the unknown depths of my children's modified genes, a storm was gathering. The doorbell rang. its cheerful chime a stark contrast to the tension that had permeated our home for weeks. I approached cautiously, peering through the peephole to see a delivery man holding a small package. With trembling hands, I opened the door just wide enough to accept the parcel. "Thank you," I mumbled, quickly shutting and locking the door behind me. The package was unmarked save for our address. No return label, no postage stamps. My heart raced as I carefully opened it, half expecting it to explode in my face. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note. "The truth you seek lies within. Be careful who you trust." A friend. Emily's voice startled me. "Dad? What's that?" I turned to see both my children watching me curiously from the living room doorway. For a moment I considered lying, hiding this latest development from them. But hadn't secrets already torn us apart? "I'm not sure," I admitted, "but I think it might have some answers about the experiment." Michael's eyes widened. "Well, what are we waiting for? Let's look." We gathered around my laptop as I inserted the drive. A single video file popped up, dated just a week before Sarah's supposed death. With a deep breath, I clicked play. Sarah's face filled the screen, her eyes red-rimmed and haunted. "John, Emily, Michael, if you're watching this, it means things have gone very wrong. There's so much I need to tell you, so much I've kept hidden." She took a shaky breath before continuing. "The experiment wasn't just about genetic modification. It was about unlocking human potential, about evolving our species to the next level. The DNA alterations were just the beginning." I felt Emily and Michael stiffen beside me as Sarah went on to describe abilities that sounded more like science fiction than reality. Enhanced strength, accelerated healing, telepathic communication, even manipulation of matter at a molecular level. "Our children," Sarah said, her voice breaking, "they're more than human, and that makes them both miraculous and dangerous. There are people who will want to study them, control them, use them. You must protect them, John, at all costs." The video ended abruptly, leaving us in stunned silence. "Dad?" Emily whispered, her voice trembling. Is that true? About us?" I turned to look at my children, really look at them, and for the first time, I saw something in their eyes that I'd been too blind or too scared to notice before. A depth, an intensity that seemed almost otherworldly. I don't know," I admitted. "But your mother wouldn't lie about something like this." Michael stood up abruptly, his fists clenched. "This is insane. We're not freaks or superheroes or whatever." As if in response to his outburst, the lights in the room began to flicker. A low hum filled the air, and I watched in awe and terror as small objects, pens, paper clips, even my coffee mug, began to levitate. Emily gasped, her eyes wide with fear and wonder. "Michael, are you doing that?" Michael looked around wildly, his anger giving way to panic. I don't know how to stop it." I reached out to him, trying to calm him down, but the moment my hand touched his shoulder, a jolt of energy passed between us. Suddenly I could hear thoughts that weren't my own, a jumble of fear and confusion and raw power. "Oh my God," I whispered, stumbling back. "It's true. It's all true." As Michael's panic subsided, the objects clattered back to their resting places. The three of us stared at each other, the weight of this new reality settling over us like a heavy blanket. "What do we do now?" Emily asked, her voice small and scared. Before I could answer, my phone rang. It was Mrs. Jennings, our elderly neighbor. "John," she said, her voice quavering with excitement. "You're not going to believe this, but I just saw Sarah at the grocery store. I know it sounds crazy, but I swear it was her." My mind reeled. Sarah alive. It couldn't be possible. And yet, after everything we'd just learned, could I really discount anything? "Thank you, Mrs. Jennings," I said automatically. I'll look into it." As I hung up, I turned to find Emily and Michael watching me intently. "Dad?" Emily said. "What is it?" I swallowed hard. "Mrs. Jennings thinks she saw your mother in town." Michael's eyes flashed with that eerie light again. "That's impossible, Mom's dead. We went to her funeral." But even as he spoke, doubt crept into his voice. After all, if they could move objects with their minds, was it really so far-fetched that their mother might have cheated death? We spent the next few hours in a daze, trying to process everything we'd learned. Emily and Michael tentatively explored their newfound abilities, moving small objects and attempting to communicate telepathically. I watched them with a mixture of awe and fear, still struggling to reconcile the children I'd raised with these extraordinary beings. As night fell, a heavy silence settled over the house. We were all lost in our own thoughts, grappling with the implications of our new reality. The sound of the doorbell cut through the quiet like a knife. We all froze, exchanging wary glances. "I'll get it," I said, moving cautiously towards the door. Through the peephole, I saw a figure shrouded in shadow. My hand hovered over the doorknob, every instinct screaming at me not to open it. But something deeper, some inexplicable pull, urged me forward. I opened the door, and my world tilted on its axis. There, illuminated by the porch light, stood Sarah, my wife, the woman I'd buried 5 years ago. She looked exactly as I remembered her, and yet utterly changed. Her eyes held the same otherworldly light I'd seen in our children's, and there was an aura of power around her that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Hello, John," she said, her voice achingly familiar and yet somehow alien. "It's time we had a talk." I stood there, frozen, unable to speak or move. From behind me, I heard Emily's shocked gasp and Michael's strangled cry of "Mom." Sarah's gaze moved past me to our children, and her expression softened. "Emily, Michael, my beautiful, miraculous children, I've missed you so much." As she stepped over the threshold, I felt a shift in the air, as if reality itself was bending around her. The truth I thought I knew was unraveling, replaced by something far more complex and terrifying. Sarah was alive. Our children had powers beyond human comprehension, and I had a sinking feeling that this was just the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything we thought we knew about ourselves and the world around us. As I closed the door behind her, shutting out the normal world we'd left behind, I knew our lives would never be the same again. The experiment that had brought my children into this world had unleashed forces beyond our understanding. And now, for better or worse, we were at the center of it all. Sarah's return brought more questions than answers, but one thing was clear. The truth had finally been unmasked, and there was no going back. The living room felt charged with an otherworldly energy as Sarah sat across from us, her presence both familiar and alien. Emily and Michael flanked me on the couch, their bodies tense with a mixture of joy, confusion, and fear. The air itself seemed to hum with unspoken questions. Sarah's eyes, glowing with that eerie light I'd seen in our children, swept over us. "I know you all have 1,000 questions," she began, her voice soft but resonant with power. "I'll do my best to explain everything." "You were dead," I blurted out, unable to contain myself any longer. "We buried you. How is this possible?" A sad smile played at Sarah's lips. "I never died, John. But I had to make you believe I did. It was the only way to protect you all." Michael leaned forward, his fists clenched. "Protect us from what? And why come back now?" Sarah took a deep breath, and I could see the weight of secrets in her eyes. "The experiment that brought you into this world, it was far more than just genetic modification. You, my beautiful children, are the first of a new species. Homo novus, new humans." Emily gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "What does that mean?" "It means," Sarah continued, "that you have abilities and potential far beyond what we ever imagined. The telekinesis, the telepathy, that's just the beginning. As you grow and develop, you'll discover powers that will seem like magic to the rest of the world." I felt a chill run down my spine. But why? Why create a new species? Sarah's expression hardened. Humanity is at a crossroads, John. Climate change, overpopulation, dwindling resources. We're on the brink of collapse. The experiment was meant to create a new generation capable of solving these problems, of taking humanity to the next level of evolution. So we're what? Some kind of saviors? Michael scoffed, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. You're the future, Sarah said simply. But with that comes great danger. There are those who would seek to control you, to study you, to use your abilities for their own ends. As if on cue, the sound of screeching tires and slamming car doors erupted from outside. Sarah's head snapped up, her eyes wide with alarm. They've found us, she whispered. I rushed to the window, my heart pounding. Black SUVs had surrounded our house, and men in dark suits were pouring out, weapons drawn. Government agents, I breathed, turning back to my family. They're here for us. Panic flashed across Emily and Michael's faces, but Sarah remained calm. She stood, her posture radiating a quiet strength. Children, she said, her voice taking on a commanding tone I'd never heard before. Remember everything I've taught you in your dreams. It's time to use your gifts. In our dreams? Emily echoed, confused. Sarah nodded. I've been training you while you slept, preparing you for this moment. Trust your instincts. Let your power flow. As if in response to her words, the air around Emily and Michael began to shimmer. Their eyes glowed brighter, and I could feel the energy radiating off them in waves. A loud bang on the door made us all jump. This is the Department of Homeland Security. Open up immediately. I looked to Sarah, who nodded grimly. Let them in, John. It's time to face this head on. With trembling hands, I opened the door. Immediately, armed agents poured in, their weapons trained on us. A man in a crisp suit stepped forward, his cold eyes scanning each of us. Dr. Sarah Thompson, he said, his voice dripping with disdain. You've led us on quite a chase, and these must be the subjects. They're not subjects, I growled, stepping in front of my children protectively. They're our kids. The man's lip curled in a sneer. They're property of the United States government, Mr. Thompson, the products of a classified experiment. Now, if you'll all come with us quietly. We're not going anywhere, Michael interrupted, his voice echoing with power. The agent's hand tightened on his weapon. I'm afraid you don't have a choice, son. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. As the agent raised his gun, Emily threw out her hand. The weapon flew from his grasp, disassembling midair into its component parts. Chaos erupted. Agents rushed forward, but Michael raised both hands, and an invisible force threw them back against the walls. The air crackled with energy, and I watched in awe as my children, my extraordinary children, defended our home. Emily's eyes blazed as she lifted several agents off their feet, suspending them in midair. Michael gestured, and their weapons crumpled like tin cans. Through it all, Sarah stood calmly in the center of the room, her presence a steady anchor in the storm of power swirling around us. When an agent managed to break through and lunge at her, she simply touched his forehead. He crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Stop, the lead agent shouted, his composure finally cracking. Stand down, or we'll be forced to use lethal measures. I stepped forward, placing myself between the agents and my family. You'll have to go through me first, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Sarah moved to stand beside me, her hand finding mine. Despite everything, despite the years of separation and secrets, I felt a surge of strength at her touch. You have no idea what you're dealing with, Sarah told the agents, her voice resonant with authority. These children are not your property. They are the future of humanity, and they will not be controlled or contained. As if to emphasize her point, Emily and Michael stepped up beside us. The four of us stood united, a family forged by more than just blood or genetics. The lead agent's eyes darted between us, clearly reassessing the situation. This isn't over, he spat. We have orders. Your orders are irrelevant, Sarah cut him off. You've seen what my children can do, and they're just beginning to tap into their potential. Ask yourself, is this really a fight you want to start? For a tense moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, the agent lowered his weapon. Fall back, he ordered his team. Retreat to base and await further instructions. As the agents filed out, casting wary glances over their shoulders, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. But it was short-lived. I knew this was just the beginning. When the last agent had left and the sound of their vehicles faded into the distance, we all seemed to deflate. Emily and Michael slumped against each other, the glow in their eyes dimming. "Mom," Emily said, her voice small and scared. "What happens now?" Sarah gathered both children into her arms, holding them close. "Now," she said softly, "we prepare. The world isn't ready for you yet, but it will be. We'll make sure of it." I watched them, this miraculous family of mine, and felt a swell of emotions I couldn't begin to name. Pride, fear, love, uncertainty, all swirled together in a dizzying mix. "Sarah," I said, drawing her attention, "there's so much we need to talk about, so much you need to explain." She nodded, her eyes meeting mine with a mixture of regret and determination. "I know, John, and I will explain everything, but right now we need to focus on keeping our children safe." Focus. As we began to clean up the aftermath of the confrontation, my mind raced with the implications of everything that had happened. Our children were more than human, possessed of abilities that defied explanation. Sarah was alive, changed, and clearly involved in something far bigger than I had ever imagined. And me? I was still just a regular man, caught in the middle of forces beyond my comprehension. But as I watched Sarah guide Emily and Michael through some basic exercises to control their powers, I knew my role was clear. I might not have extraordinary abilities, but I was still their father, and I would do whatever it took to protect them. As night fell, we gathered in the living room once more, the atmosphere heavy with unspoken questions and uncertain futures. "We can't stay here," Sarah said, breaking the silence. "It's not safe anymore. We need to go somewhere they won't think to look for us." "But what about school? Our friends?" Michael protested. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Son, after what happened today, I think it's safe to say that normal life isn't an option anymore." Emily looked up, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Are we ever going to have a normal life again?" Sarah knelt before her, cupping her face gently. "Oh, sweetheart, your life was never going to be normal, but it will be extraordinary. You and your brother have the power to change the world to make it better. It won't be easy, but it will be worth it." As we began to plan our next move, packing essentials and discussing possible safe havens, I couldn't help but feel a strange mix of fear and excitement. Our family had been thrust into the center of something monumental, something that could reshape the very future of humanity. Looking at Sarah, at the children we had created together, through love, science, and forces I still didn't fully understand, I realized that we were no longer just a family. We were the progenitors of a new era in human evolution. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with dangers and challenges we could scarcely imagine. But as I watched Emily levitate a suitcase into the car with a mere thought, and Michael create a shimmering force field around our vehicle, I felt a surge of hope. Whatever the future held, we would face it together, as a family, as the guardians of a new age. And as we pulled out of our driveway, leaving behind the only home our children had ever known, I knew that this was not an end, but a beginning. The reckoning had come, and we had survived. Now it was time to shape the world that would come after. Sarah reached over and squeezed my hand, a gesture so familiar and yet now charged with new meaning. "Are you ready for this?" she asked softly. I looked in the rearview mirror at Emily and Michael, their faces a mixture of fear and determination. Then I turned to Sarah, this woman I had loved, lost, and found again in the most extraordinary circumstances. "Ready or not," I said, "here we go." And with that we drove off into the night, leaving behind the world we knew and heading towards a future limited only by the incredible potential of our extraordinary children. I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror, exhausted after a long day at work. The bags under my eyes seemed more pronounced than ever, and my skin looked pale in the harsh fluorescent light. I sighed, reaching for my toothbrush. Another day, another dollar, I muttered to myself, squeezing a dollop of toothpaste onto the bristles. As I began to brush, my eyes locked with those of my reflection. That's when it happened. My reflection winked at me, a mischievous glint in its eye. I froze, the toothbrush hanging limply from my mouth. I hadn't blinked. I was certain of it. My heart began to race as I stared intently at the mirror, searching for any sign that I had imagined it. "Get a grip, Emma," I whispered, spitting into the sink and rinsing my mouth. "You're just tired. It's been a long week." But as I raised my head to look at the mirror again, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. My reflection seemed different somehow. The eyes that stared back at me held a glimmer of something I couldn't quite place. Amusement? Malice? I shook my head, trying to clear my thoughts. "It's nothing. Just go to bed." As I turned to leave the bathroom, movement in the mirror caught my eye. I whirled around, my breath catching in my throat. For a split second, I could have sworn I saw my reflection's lips curl into a sinister smirk. Panic began to set in as I stood rooted to the spot, unable to tear my eyes away from the glass. The longer I stared, the more convinced I became that my reflection was moving independently. Its movements were subtle, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. "This isn't real," I said aloud, my voice shaking. "This can't be happening." But it was happening. As I watched in horror, my reflection's head tilted slightly to the side, a gesture I hadn't made. Its eyes seemed to bore into me, filled with an intelligence that was entirely separate from my own. I backed away from the mirror, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I stumbled out of the bathroom, slamming the door behind me and leaning against it, breathing heavily. "Okay, Emma. Think," I muttered to myself, running my hands through my hair. There has to be a logical explanation for this. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't come up with anything that made sense. I paced back and forth in my bedroom, occasionally glancing at the closed bathroom door as if expecting my rogue reflection to come bursting through at any moment. Sleep was out of the question. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that wink, that smirk, playing on repeat in my mind. I sat on the edge of my bed, hugging my knees to my chest as the hours ticked by. As dawn broke, painting the sky outside my window in shades of pink and gold, I finally gathered the courage to approach the bathroom again. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. "It's just a mirror," I told myself firmly. "There's nothing to be afraid of." Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Sunlight streamed through the small window, casting a warm glow over the room. Slowly, I raised my eyes to the mirror. My reflection stared back at me, perfectly normal. It mimicked my movements exactly as I raised a hand to touch my face, blinked when I blinked, frowned when I frowned. There was no sign of the unsettling independence I had witnessed the night before. Relief flooded through me, followed quickly by doubt. Had I imagined the whole thing? Was I losing my mind? "Maybe I just need a vacation," I said to my reflection, watching as its lips moved in sync with mine. "Yeah, that's it. I'm just stressed and overworked." But even as I tried to rationalize what had happened, a nagging feeling persisted in the back of my mind. Something wasn't right, and deep down, I knew it. I went through the motions of getting ready for work, all the while avoiding looking directly at the mirror for too long. As I applied my makeup, I couldn't shake the feeling that my reflection's eyes were following me, even when I wasn't looking at them. Just before I left the bathroom, I caught a glimpse of movement in the mirror out of the corner of my eye. I turned quickly, but everything seemed normal. "Get it together," I scolded myself. "You're going to be late for work if you keep this up." I hurried out of the apartment, locking the door behind me. As I walked to my car, I couldn't help but feel like I was leaving something behind. Or perhaps something was following me. Throughout the day, I found myself avoiding reflective surfaces. I kept my head down when passing store windows and averted my eyes from the rearview mirror in my car. My coworkers noticed my distraction. "Are you feeling all right, Emma?" my friend Sarah asked during our lunch break. "You seem a bit off today." I forced a smile. "I'm fine. Just didn't sleep well last night. Weird dreams, you know?" Sarah nodded sympathetically, but I could tell she wasn't entirely convinced. As the day wore on, my anxiety grew. The thought of returning home to face that mirror again filled me with dread. By the time I unlocked my apartment door that evening, my nerves were frayed to the breaking point. I stood in the hallway, staring at the closed bathroom door, gathering my courage. "It's now or never," I whispered, taking a deep breath. I pushed the door open and flicked on the light. The mirror stood there innocently, reflecting the bathroom as it always had. But as I locked eyes with my reflection, a chill ran down my spine. For just a moment so brief I almost missed it, I saw it again. That same mischievous glint, that same subtle smirk. And then it was gone, leaving me questioning my sanity once more. As I got ready for bed that night, one thought kept repeating in my mind. What if my reflection wasn't just a reflection anymore? What if it had become something else entirely? Something alive, something malevolent? I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, knowing that sleep would be elusive once again. Whatever was happening, whatever that thing in the mirror was, I knew my life would never be the same. The days following that first terrifying night blurred together in a haze of paranoia and fear. I tried to convince myself that it had been a hallucination, a trick of the light, or simply my overtired mind playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew the truth. Something was terribly wrong with my reflection. At first, it was subtle. I'd catch glimpses of movement in the mirror when I wasn't looking directly at it. A slight turn of the head, a twitch of the lips, a blink that didn't match my own. Each time I'd whirl around to face the mirror, my reflection would snap back to normal, mimicking my movements perfectly. "You're losing it, Emma," I muttered to myself one morning, gripping the edges of the bathroom sink so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Pull yourself together." But as I raised my eyes to apply my mascara, I froze. My reflection's eyes were following the movement of my hand, but its head remained perfectly still. A chill ran down my spine as I watched those eyes, my eyes, track my every move with a predatory intensity. My hand shook violently as I tried to steady it, causing me to smear mascara across my cheek. "Stop it," I hissed at the mirror. "Just stop it." For a moment, my reflection's eyes gleamed with what could only be described as malicious glee. Then, quick as a flash, it was gone, and I was left staring at my own terrified face. I called in sick to work that day, unable to face the outside world. Instead, I paced my apartment, alternating between convincing myself I was going crazy and peering nervously into every reflective surface I passed. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across my living room, I found myself drawn back to the bathroom mirror. It was as if some unseen force was pulling me there, despite every instinct screaming at me to stay away. I approached cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. At first, everything seemed normal. My reflection mirrored my movements exactly, its expression a match for my own wary frown. Then, without warning, it happened. My reflection's face contorted into a mask of pure rage, its eyes bulging, mouth stretched in a silent scream. It lunged forward, slamming against the glass with such force I could have sworn I felt the impact. I stumbled backward, a scream tearing from my throat. "No, this isn't real." But it was real. As I watched in horror, my reflection pressed its hands against the glass, pushing as if trying to break through. Its fingers seemed to elongate, nails scraping against the surface with a sound that set my teeth on edge. I ran from the bathroom, slamming the door behind me and sliding down to the floor, my whole body shaking uncontrollably. "This can't be happening," I sobbed, burying my face in my hands. "Please, let this be a nightmare." But I knew it wasn't. This was my new reality and I had no idea how to escape it. The next morning, I woke to find myself curled up on the living room floor, having finally succumbed to exhaustion. As awareness crept in, so did the memory of the previous night's terror. I sat up slowly, my eyes darting around the room. The morning sunlight reflected off the glass coffee table, the TV screen, the window panes. Everywhere I looked, I saw potential threats. "No more," I whispered, a plan forming in my mind. I spent the next few hours on a frenzied mission. I raided my linen closet, pulling out every sheet and towel I owned. One by one, I covered every reflective surface in my apartment. The mirrors, the windows, the TV, even the microwave door. Nothing was left uncovered. As I worked, I could feel eyes on me, watching from every angle. More than once I caught movement out of the corner of my eye, only to turn and find nothing but a covered surface. By the time I finished, my apartment looked like a ghost town, sheets draped over everything like specters. I stood in the middle of my living room, breathing heavily, surveying my work. "There," I said, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the quiet apartment. "Now you can't get to me." But even as I said it, doubt crept in. Was this really a solution, or was I just trapping myself? As the days wore on, I became a prisoner in my own home. I called in sick to work again, ignoring the concerned messages from my boss and co-workers. I couldn't bear the thought of facing the outside world, with its myriad of reflective surfaces waiting to torment me. I moved through my sheet-draped apartment like a ghost, jumping at every sound, flinching at every shadow. Sleep became a luxury I could rarely afford, for in my dreams my reflection waited, grinning and beckoning me closer. On the 5th day of my self-imposed isolation, I reached my breaking point. The constant fear, the lack of sleep, the gnawing doubt, it all became too much. "This is ridiculous," I said aloud, standing in front of the covered bathroom mirror. "I'm letting fear control my life. It's time to face this." With trembling hands, I reached for the edge of the sheet. I hesitated for a moment, my heart racing. "Come on, Emma, it's just a mirror." Taking a deep breath, I yanked the sheet down. For a split second, everything seemed normal. My reflection stared back at me, pale and disheveled from days of fear and lack of sleep. Then, slowly, its lips curled into a wide, menacing grin. I watched, paralyzed with terror, as my reflection raised its hand and waved at me, a taunting gesture that sent chills down my spine. "No," I whispered, backing away. "This isn't possible." But my reflection didn't stop. It pressed its hands against the glass, that terrible grin never faltering. And then, to my horror, I saw its fingers begin to push through, as if the mirror had turned to water. I ran from the bathroom, my scream echoing through the apartment. I didn't stop until I reached the front door, fumbling with the lock with shaking hands. As I burst out into the hallway, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I couldn't stay here anymore. Whatever was happening, whatever that thing in the mirror was, it was getting stronger, and I was running out of time to find a way to stop it. With one last terrified glance at my apartment door, I fled, leaving behind the sanctuary that had become my prison. I found myself in a 24-hour diner, hunched over my laptop, my third cup of coffee growing cold beside me. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on the worn Formica tabletop. It had been 2 days since I fled my apartment, and sleep was a distant memory. My fingers flew across the keyboard, each search more desperate than the last. Mirror reflection moving on its own. Evil twin in mirror. Haunted mirrors. The results were a mix of urban legends, horror movie plots, and New Age spiritualism. Nothing seemed to match the terror I had experienced. "You okay there, hun?" The waitress's voice startled me. She eyed the untouched plate of eggs she'd set down an hour ago. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I forced a weak smile. "Just doing some research, thanks." As she walked away, I caught my reflection in the chrome napkin dispenser and quickly averted my eyes. Even here, I wasn't safe. Turning back to my screen, a link caught my eye. "Ancient mirrors, Portals to other worlds? I clicked, and as I read, my blood ran cold. The article spoke of mirrors as liminal spaces, thresholds between our world and others. It mentioned legends from various cultures about mirrors trapping souls, serving as gateways for malevolent entities or showing glimpses of alternate realities. In some traditions, I read aloud in a whisper, it was believed that one's reflection was actually a separate entity, a doppelganger or fetch, that could, under certain circumstances, gain independence and even seek to replace the original. My hands shook as I scrolled further, finding references to cursed mirrors throughout history. The Myrtles Plantation Mirror, allegedly showing the ghosts of murdered slaves. The Haunted Mirror of Bela Lugosi, said to be portals to the afterlife. As dawn broke, painting the diner windows with pale light, I realized I'd spent the entire night reading. My eyes burned and my head throbbed, but I couldn't stop. I was finally finding answers, even if they terrified me. The next few days blurred together in a haze of caffeine and fear. I moved from library to internet cafe, always searching, always looking over my shoulder. I delved deeper into the occult, reading about mirror scrying, cat optromancy, and the dark rituals of mirror magic. One night, as I sat in a dimly lit corner of a 24-hour laundromat, surrounded by the hum of washing machines, I stumbled upon a forum thread that made my heart race. "Trapped in the Mirror, My Story," the title read. The post described an experience chillingly similar to mine, a reflection that moved independently, that seemed to be growing stronger, more malevolent. With trembling fingers, I typed out a response. "Please, I need help. This is happening to me too. What did you do?" Hours passed as I refreshed the page repeatedly, hoping for a reply. Finally, just as the first rays of sunlight began to creep through the grimy laundromat windows, a notification popped up. The response was brief. "Dr. Evelyn Clark. She helped me. Find her." Hope flickered in my chest for the first time in days. I immediately began searching for Dr. Clark, my fatigue forgotten. It took hours of digging, but finally I found her. Dr. Evelyn Clark, parapsychologist and expert in paranormal phenomena. Her website was professional, academic even, with no hint of the sensationalism I'd come to expect from paranormal researchers. "This is it," I murmured, staring at the contact information on the screen. This could be my way out. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed the number. Each ring seemed to last an eternity. "Dr. Clark's office, how may I assist you?" A calm, professional voice answered. I need to speak with Dr. Clark," I stammered. "It's urgent, please. I'm afraid Dr. Clark's schedule is quite full at the moment. May I take a message?" Panic rose in my throat. "No, you don't understand. I need to talk to her now. It's about a mirror. My reflection is trying to kill me." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, "One moment, please." The hold music seemed to stretch on forever. I paced back and forth in the laundromat, ignoring the curious glances from the few other patrons. Finally, a new voice came on the line. "This is Dr. Clark. I understand you're experiencing some trouble with a mirror?" Her voice was calm, authoritative, with a slight British accent. I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Yes, I said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "My reflection, it's alive or something. It moves on its own. It tried to attack me. I know how this sounds, but I swear I'm not crazy. Please, you have to believe me." "Slow down," Dr. Clark said gently. "Start from the beginning. When did this first occur?" For the next hour, I poured out my story, detailing every terrifying encounter with my rogue reflection. Dr. Clark listened patiently, occasionally asking for clarification, but never expressing doubt or disbelief. When I finished, there was a long moment of silence. Then Dr. Clark spoke, her voice grave. "What you're describing is rare but not unheard of. It seems you're dealing with a particularly powerful form of mirror entrapment. The entity in your mirror, which may or may not be a part of you, is trying to break through into our world." I felt a chill run down my spine. What can I do? This isn't something we can discuss over the phone, Dr. Clark said. I need to see the mirror for myself. Can you return to your apartment? The thought of going back filled me with dread, but I knew I had no choice. Yes, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Good. I'll clear my schedule and fly out first thing tomorrow morning. Text this number your address. And Emma? Yes? Whatever you do, don't look into the mirror. Don't even uncover it. The entity feeds on your fear and attention. The less you engage with it, the better. As I hung up the phone, I felt a mix of terror and hope. I had answers now, and possibly a way out. But to find that way, I would have to face my worst nightmare once again. With a deep breath, I gathered my things and headed for the door. The knock on my apartment door made me jump, my nerves still raw from the sleepless nights and constant fear. I approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. A woman in her mid-50s with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes stood in the hallway, a leather briefcase in hand. Emma, it's Dr. Clark, she called softly. I unlocked the door with trembling hands, relief washing over me as I came face to face with the parapsychologist. Thank you for coming, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Clark stepped inside, her eyes scanning the sheet-covered surfaces of my living room. I see you've taken precautions, she noted, her tone neutral. I nodded, wringing my hands. I couldn't bear to look at any reflections. It's everywhere, always watching, always changing. Dr. Clark placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. You've been very brave, Emma. Now why don't you tell me everything from the beginning? Don't leave out any details, no matter how small or strange they might seem. We sat on my couch and I recounted my harrowing experiences once more. Dr. Clark listened intently, her face a mask of concentration. She didn't interrupt, didn't scoff or show any signs of disbelief. Her calm demeanor was a balm to my frayed nerves. When I finished, Dr. Clark leaned back, her brow furrowed in thought. Thank you for sharing that, Emma. I know it wasn't easy to relive those moments. Now, I need to examine the mirror. Where is it? I pointed towards the bathroom. In there. I haven't uncovered it since that night. Dr. Clark stood, picking up her briefcase. I understand. I'll need to see it, but you don't have to come in if you're not comfortable. Part of me wanted to stay behind, to hide from the terror that lurked behind that sheet. But a stronger part knew I had to face this. No, I'll come. I need to see this through. We entered the bathroom together. Dr. Clark approached the covered mirror slowly, her hand hovering over the sheet. She turned to me. Are you ready? I took a deep breath and nodded. In one swift motion, she pulled the sheet away. I flinched, expecting to see that malevolent version of myself grinning back at me. Instead, I saw only my own terrified face, pale and drawn from lack of sleep. Dr. Clark leaned in close, her nose almost touching the glass. She ran her fingers along the frame, muttering under her breath. As I watched, her expression grew increasingly grave. What is it? I asked, dread settling in the pit of my stomach. What do you see? Dr. Clark stepped back, her face grim. This mirror, Emma. It's indeed cursed, and it's one of the most powerful I've ever encountered. My knees felt weak. Even though I'd known, hearing it confirmed made it real in a way it hadn't been before. What does that mean? What's happening to me? Dr. Clark guided me back to the living room, sitting me down on the couch. The mirror is acting as a portal, a gateway between our world and something else. The entity you've been seeing isn't just a reflection, it's a separate consciousness trying to break through. I felt the blood drain from my face. Break through? You mean into our world? She nodded solemnly. Mirrors have long been viewed as liminal spaces in various cultures. This particular mirror seems to have a dark history of trapping souls and allowing malevolent entities to cross over. But why me? I asked, my voice cracking. Why is this happening now? Dr. Clark opened her briefcase, pulling out an old leather-bound book. That's what we need to find out. The why is often as important as the what in these cases. She began flipping through the pages, stopping occasionally to read passages. This mirror, or one very similar to it, has appeared in occult texts dating back centuries. There are accounts of it belonging to a 16th century alchemist who used it in dark rituals to communicate with otherworldly beings. I listened, hanging on her every word as she delved into the mirror's chilling history. Tales of disappeared owners, of people driven to madness, of rooms found empty save for the mirror on the wall. The last recorded owner, Dr. Clark continued, was a collector of occult artifacts in the 1970s. He claimed the mirror showed him visions of other worlds, but that something was trying to come through. He disappeared under mysterious circumstances and the mirror was thought lost. Until now. I felt sick. How did it end up in my apartment? I bought it at a thrift store. Dr. Clark shook her head. These objects have a way of finding their way to people. It's possible it was drawn to you for a reason. What reason? I asked, dreading the answer. That's what we need to find out, she replied. The entity in the mirror is growing stronger, feeding off your fear and attention. If we don't act soon, it may gain enough power to break through completely. Panic rose in my chest. What can we do? How do we stop it? Dr. Clark's expression softened slightly, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. There might be a way. In my research, I've come across references to an ancient ritual that could potentially break the curse and seal the portal. I leaned forward eagerly. A ritual? What kind of ritual? It's complex, she warned, and dangerous. It involves confronting the entity directly, in a sort of psychic battle. We'd be attempting to close the gateway from both sides simultaneously. The thought of facing that thing again made my blood run cold, but I knew I had no choice. What do we need to do? Dr. Clark began outlining the ritual, explaining the components we'd need and the risks involved. As she spoke, I felt a mix of terror and determination settling over me. This was my chance to end this nightmare, to reclaim my life. It won't be easy, Emma, Dr. Clark said, her voice gentle but firm. And I can't guarantee success, but it's our best chance at stopping this entity and breaking the mirror's curse once and for all. I took a deep breath, squaring my shoulders. I understand. Whatever it takes, I'm ready. When do we start? Dr. Clark nodded approvingly. We'll need to gather the necessary components and prepare. We should be ready by tomorrow night. For now, try to rest. You'll need your strength for what's to come. As Dr. Clark packed up her things, preparing to leave and gather what we needed, I felt a strange calm settling over me. The terror was still there, lurking beneath the surface, but for the first time in weeks, I had hope. Tomorrow, one way or another, this would end. I glanced towards the bathroom, knowing what waited behind that closed door. I'm coming for you, I whispered. The day of the ritual dawned gray and overcast, as if the very sky sensed the gravity of what we were about to attempt. I had barely slept, my dreams plagued by distorted reflections and shadowy figures reaching out from mirrors. Dr. Clark arrived early, her arms laden with bags filled with an assortment of strange objects. As she unpacked, I marveled at the eclectic mix: bundles of herbs, crystals of various colors and shapes, candles, vials of liquids I couldn't identify, and ancient-looking scrolls. What is all this? I asked, picking up a small, intricately carved wooden box. Dr. Clark gently took the box from my hands, placing it on the table with reverence. Each item has its purpose in the ritual, some for protection, others to amplify our energy, and a few to help breach the barrier between worlds. She handed me a bundle of dried herbs. Sage, for purification. Rosemary for protection. Mugwort to enhance psychic abilities. We'll need to cleanse the space before we begin. As we moved through my apartment, burning the herbs and allowing the fragrant smoke to fill every corner, Dr. Clark explained the ritual in more detail. The mirror acts as a gateway, she said, her voice low and serious. We need to close it from both sides simultaneously. You'll need to confront the entity in the mirror realm while I work to seal the portal from this side. A chill ran down my spine. You mean, I have to go in there? Into the mirror? Dr. Clark nodded gravely. It's the only way. Your connection to the entity makes you the key. But don't worry, I'll be guiding you every step of the way. As the day wore on, we meticulously prepared the bathroom. Dr. Clark instructed me to draw intricate symbols around the mirror's frame with a piece of white chalk. My hands trembled as I traced the unfamiliar patterns, each line feeling heavy with mystical significance. These sigils will help contain the entity and strengthen the barrier between our worlds, Dr. Clark explained as she checked my work. Well done, Emma. Your focus is admirable. Next came the candles, dozens of them, placed strategically around the room. Black for banishing negative energy, white for protection, purple for spiritual power. As we lit them one by one, the bathroom took on an otherworldly glow. Now for the final preparations, Dr. Clark said, retrieving the wooden box I had noticed earlier. She opened it carefully, revealing a small, ornate dagger with symbols etched into its blade. My eyes widened. What's that for? A few drops of your blood will be needed to complete the ritual, she explained gently. It will strengthen your connection to this realm, making it easier for you to find your way back. I swallowed hard, but nodded. At this point, a little blood seemed a small price to pay. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the apartment, the tension in the air grew palpable. Dr. Clark and I sat in the living room, going over the final details of the ritual. Remember, she said, her eyes locked on mine, once you're on the other side, things may not appear as they do here. Trust your instincts, and whatever you do, don't let the entity deceive you. It will try to trick you, to keep you trapped. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. How will I know what to do once I'm there? Dr. Clark smiled reassuringly. You'll know. The ritual will guide you. Just focus on your desire to seal the portal and return home. As night fell, we made our final preparations. I changed into a simple white robe Dr. Clark had brought, symbolizing purity of intent. She anointed my forehead, hands, and feet with a fragrant oil, murmuring words in a language I didn't understand. Finally, we stood before the bathroom door. The air felt thick with anticipation, the scent of herbs and melting wax heavy in the air. Are you ready? Dr. Clark asked, her hand on the doorknob. I took a shaky breath, squaring my shoulders. As ready as I'll ever be. We entered the bathroom, now transformed into a mystical chamber. The candlelight flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The mirror loomed before us, its surface seeming to ripple slightly in the dim light. Dr. Clark positioned me in front of the mirror, standing slightly behind me. She handed me the ritual dagger. 3 drops of blood on the mirror's surface, she instructed. Then repeat the incantation I taught you. With trembling hands, I pricked my finger, watching as 3 crimson drops fell onto the glass. The mirror seemed to absorb them, the surface shimmering. I began to chant, the unfamiliar words feeling heavy on my tongue. As I spoke, the candles flared brighter, and the air in the room began to stir, as if moved by an unfelt wind. Dr. Clark's voice joined mine, her words weaving with my own in a complex harmony. The mirror's surface began to swirl, colors and shapes twisting within its depths. My heart pounded so loudly I feared it might shatter the mirror itself. But beneath the fear, I felt a surge of determination. This was it. This was my chance to reclaim my life, to banish the terror that had haunted me for weeks. As the ritual reached its crescendo, the mirror's surface suddenly liquefied, becoming a shimmering portal. I could see another world beyond, dark and distorted. Dr. Clark's hand gripped my shoulder. Remember, Emma, find the source of the entity's power and destroy it. I'll be here holding the portal open. You can do this. With one last deep breath, I stepped forward, feeling the mirror's surface part around me like water. As I crossed the threshold, I heard Dr. Clark's voice fading behind me. Good luck, Emma. And remember, don't trust what you see. Then I was through, plunging into the dark, twisted world beyond the mirror. The world beyond the mirror was a grotesque parody of my bathroom, twisted and warped as if seen through a funhouse mirror. The walls seemed to breathe, pulsing with an otherworldly energy that made my skin crawl. Shadows danced at the corners of my vision, always just out of sight when I turned to look. I took a cautious step forward, the floor beneath my feet shifting like quicksand. The air was thick and oppressive, tasting of decay and something metallic, like blood. In the distance I could hear whispers, a cacophony of voices speaking in languages I couldn't understand. Focus, Emma, I muttered to myself, trying to steady my nerves. Find the source of the entity's power. As if in response to my words, a cruel laugh echoed through the distorted space. I spun around searching for its source, but the sound seemed to come from everywhere at once. Welcome, Emma, a voice purred, sickeningly familiar yet alien at the same time. We've been waiting for you. From the shadows a figure emerged, my reflection, but not quite. Its features were sharper, its smile too wide and filled with needle-like teeth. Its eyes glowed with an unholy light. You, I breathed, taking an involuntary step back. What are you? The entity's grin widened impossibly further. I'm you, Emma. The better you. The stronger you. The you that isn't afraid to take what she wants. I shook my head, remembering Dr. Clark's warning. No, you're lying. You're just trying to trick me. The creature laughed again, the sound grating against my nerves. Oh, Emma. Still so naive. Did you really think you could come here and defeat me? In my own realm? As it spoke, the room began to shift and warp even more dramatically. Reflective surfaces appeared on every wall, each one showing a different version of myself, some familiar, others nightmarish distortions. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the dizzying array of images. Ancient spirits, guardians of the threshold, I began to chant, the words Dr. Clark had taught me flowing from my lips. I call upon your power to banish this evil. Before I could finish, an invisible force slammed into me, knocking the breath from my lungs. I stumbled, my eyes flying open to see the entity lunging towards me, its form flickering between my reflection and something far more monstrous. You dare invoke the ancient powers here? It snarled, all pretense of friendliness gone. This is my domain, little girl. Your pathetic rituals have no power here. I scrambled backward, my heart pounding in my chest. That's where you're wrong, I shot back, surprised by the strength in my own voice. I have more power than you know. Summoning every ounce of courage I possessed, I began the ritual anew. By earth and air, by fire and water, I command thee. The room began to spin, faster and faster, as my words resonated through the twisted space. The entity howled in rage, its form blurring as it tried to approach me. But with each word I spoke, it seemed to grow weaker, less substantial. Faces pressed against the myriad reflective surfaces surrounding us, their eyes wide with a mixture of hope and terror. I realized with a start that these were the souls the mirror had trapped over the centuries, and my ritual was weakening the entity's hold on them. No! The creature shrieked, its voice no longer my own, but a cacophony of 1,000 tortured souls. You cannot take them from me. They're mine. I pressed on, the ancient words flowing from my lips with increasing power. The air crackled with energy, and I could feel something building, a pressure that threatened to tear this twisted realm apart. The entity, now barely holding its form together, made one last, desperate lunge towards me. If I fall, I'm taking you with me, it howled. But as its clawed hand reached for my throat, a blinding light erupted between us. I heard Dr. Clark's voice, distant but clear, joining mine in the final verses of the ritual. A deafening crack split the air, and I watched in awe and terror as fractures began to spiderweb across every reflective surface. The entity let out an unearthly scream as its form began to disintegrate, pulled apart by the very forces it had once commanded. "No, no, no," it wailed, its voice fading. "This isn't possible. I am eternal. I am—" Its final words were cut off as the fractures in reality deepened. I felt myself being pulled towards the largest crack, which I realized with a jolt was the portal back to my own world. "Emma!" Dr. Clark's voice called out, stronger now. "Come back now. The portal is closing." With one last look at the crumbling mirror realm, I launched myself towards the fracture. As I passed through, I felt the trapped souls surging around me, finally free after centuries of captivity. The sensation of passing through the portal was like being turned inside out and reassembled. I tumbled out onto the cold tile of my bathroom floor, gasping for breath. Dr. Clark was there in an instant, helping me to my feet. "You did it," she said, her voice filled with awe and relief. "You actually did it." I looked up at the mirror, expecting to see the swirling vortex of the other realm. Instead, I saw only my own reflection, pale, shaken, but undeniably me. A spiderweb of cracks spread across the mirror's surface, and as we watched, it shattered completely, raining shards of glass onto the floor. Is it over?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Dr. Clark nodded, a tired smile on her face. "It's over. The portal is sealed, the entity destroyed. You've freed not only yourself, but countless others who were trapped by its power." As the adrenaline began to fade, I felt the full weight of exhaustion settling over me. But mixed with the fatigue was an overwhelming sense of relief and triumph. I had faced my deepest fears, confronted an ancient evil, and emerged victorious. As I looked at my reflection in the scattered shards of glass, I saw not just myself, but a stronger, braver version of Emma, one who had stared into the abyss and come back stronger for it. The nightmare was finally over, and for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to truly breathe. The world on this side of the mirror was a nightmarish inversion of reality. Colors seemed muted and wrong, shadows moved of their own accord, and the very air felt thick and oppressive. I stumbled forward, my legs unsteady as if I were walking through water. "Dr. Clark?" I called out, my voice sounding hollow and distant. "Can you hear me?" There was no response. I was alone in this twisted version of my bathroom, the familiar space now warped and alien. The mirror that had been my portal now showed only a cloudy, impenetrable surface. I was truly on the other side. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, I became aware of movement in the corners of the room. Shadowy figures flickered at the edge of my vision, always disappearing when I turned to look directly at them. A chill ran down my spine as I realized I wasn't alone here. "Hello?" I ventured, my voice quavering. "Is anyone there?" A soft moan answered me, the sound filled with such profound sorrow that it made my heart ache. From the shadows, a figure emerged, a woman, her features blurred and indistinct, like a photograph left too long in the sun. "Help us," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "We've been trapped here so long." As she spoke, other figures began to materialize around the room. Men, women, even children, all with the same faded, insubstantial appearance. Their eyes, however, were vivid and full of pain. "Who are you?" I asked, fighting to keep the panic from my voice. "What is this place?" An elderly man stepped forward, his form flickering like a candle flame. "We are the Forgotten," he said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. "The souls trapped by the mirror's curse. This realm is our prison, neither fully in your world nor completely separate from it." As I looked closer, I began to recognize some of the faces from the stories Dr. Clark had told me. The 16th century alchemist, his eyes wild with the madness that had consumed him. The collector from the 1970s, his expression a mask of regret. "How long have you been here?" I asked, my heart breaking for these lost souls. "Time has no meaning here," a young girl replied, her voice eerily adult. "We've watched the world change through countless reflections, unable to touch or interact. Always separate, always alone. The realization of their plight hit me like a physical blow. These weren't malevolent entities, they were victims just as I had nearly become. The true evil was the mirror itself, feeding off their fear and despair. "I'm going to help you," I said, surprising myself with the determination in my voice. "I'll find a way to break the curse and set you free." A ripple of hope passed through the assembled spirits, but the alchemist shook his head sadly. "Many have tried, child. All have failed. The mirror's power is too strong." "No," I insisted. "I made it this far. There has to be a way." I began to search the twisted bathroom, looking for anything that might help. The spirits watched me curiously, some with hope, others with skepticism born from years of disappointment. As I examined the clouded surface of the mirror, I noticed something strange. Faint images flickered across its surface, glimpses of the real world. And there, for just a moment, I saw Dr. Clark's face, her expression one of intense concentration. "Dr. Clark," I shouted, pressing my hands against the glass. "I'm here. Can you hear me?" Her image faded, but I felt a surge of hope. The boundary between worlds was thin here. Maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to break through. I turned back to the spirits. "I need your help," I said. "If we work together, we might be able to break the mirror's hold." The spirits exchanged glances, centuries of resignation warring with a newfound spark of hope. Finally, the young girl stepped forward. "What do you need us to do?" I took a deep breath, formulating a plan. "We need to weaken the mirror's power. Each of you represents a link in its chain. If we can sever those links..." As I spoke, I felt a change in the air. The oppressive atmosphere seemed to lighten and the shadows retreated. The spirits gathered around me, their forms becoming slightly more substantial. "It's working," the elderly man said, wonder in his voice. "Your presence here, your determination, it's already affecting the mirror's power." Encouraged, I began to recite the ritual words Dr. Clark had taught me. The spirits joined in, their voices a haunting chorus that seemed to resonate through the very fabric of this strange realm. As we chanted, cracks began to appear in the mirror's surface. Light seeped through, growing brighter with each passing moment. The spirits around me began to glow, their forms becoming more defined. "Keep going," I urged, my voice rising above the otherworldly chorus. "We're breaking through." The cracks in the mirror widened, and suddenly I could hear Dr. Clark's voice, faint but clear. "Emma, can you hear me? Follow my voice." "I hear you," I shouted back, pressing my hands against the fracturing glass. "I'm coming." The spirits surged forward, their combined energy pulsing through me and into the mirror. With a deafening crack, the barrier shattered. Light flooded the twisted bathroom, and I felt myself being pulled forward. The spirits streamed past me, their faces radiant with joy as they finally found release. "Thank you," the young girl whispered as she passed, her form already fading into the light. "We're free." As the last of the spirits disappeared, I felt myself falling. I tumbled through a kaleidoscope of fractured reflections, each one showing a different version of reality. Just when I thought I couldn't bear it any longer, I felt solid ground beneath me. I opened my eyes to find myself back in my own bathroom, sprawled on the floor amidst a sea of broken glass. Dr. Clark was kneeling beside me, her face etched with concern and relief. "Emma, are you all right?" I sat up slowly, my whole body aching, but my spirit soaring. "I'm okay," I said, my voice hoarse. "We did it. They're free." Dr. Clark helped me to my feet, carefully avoiding the shards of the now destroyed mirror. "You were incredible," she said, admiration clear in her voice. "I've never seen anything like it." As we surveyed the aftermath of the ritual, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment wash over me. Not only had I faced my fears and overcome them, but I had also helped free countless souls from centuries of torment. The nightmare was truly over, and as I looked at my reflection in the scattered fragments of the mirror, I saw someone stronger, braver, and more capable than I had ever imagined I could be. "What happens now?" I asked Dr. Clark, suddenly uncertain about how to return to normal life after such an extraordinary experience. She smiled warmly. "Now, you rest. And then, if you're interested, I think you might have a future in parapsychology. The world needs more people like you, Emma. People who can face the unknown and come out stronger for it." As we left the bathroom, closing the door on the remnants of the cursed mirror, I felt a sense of excitement for what the future might hold. My ordeal had opened my eyes to a world beyond the ordinary, and I was eager to explore it further. The other side had shown me horrors, but it had also revealed my own strength. The otherworldly realm pulsed with malevolent energy, the very air thick with the despair of countless trapped souls. I stood facing my twisted reflection, its features contorted into a cruel sneer. This was the true guardian of the mirror, the entity that had been tormenting me all along. "Did you really think it would be so easy?" It taunted, its voice a distorted echo of my own. "That you could just waltz in here and free everyone?" I clenched my fists, feeling the weight of all those lost souls behind me. "I'm not leaving without them," I declared, my voice steadier than I felt. The entity laughed, the sound grating against my nerves. "Oh, Emma. Sweet, naive Emma. You have no idea of the power you're dealing with." As if to demonstrate, it waved a hand. The air shimmered, and suddenly we were surrounded by swirling vortexes of darkness. Within each one, I could see faces, terrified, pleading faces of those trapped by the mirror's curse. "Watch," my reflection hissed, its eyes glowing with malice. To my horror, one of the vortexes began to contract. The face within it, a young man, his eyes wide with terror, began to scream. I lunged forward, trying to reach him, but an invisible force held me back. "No!" I cried out, as the vortex collapsed in on itself, the man's essence seeming to dissolve into the darkness. The entity grinned, feeding off my anguish. "That's right, Emma. Feel their pain, their fear, their hopelessness. It's delicious, isn't it?" Rage boiled up within me, hot and fierce. "You monster," I spat. "How could you do this?" "Do?" It laughed. "I don't do anything. They trap themselves, their fears, their regrets, their darkest thoughts. That's what gives me power. I merely facilitate." I shook my head, refusing to believe it. "No, you prey on them. You feed off their suffering." "Semantics," it shrugged, my own features twisted into a mockery of nonchalance. "The result is the same, and soon you'll join them." With that, it lunged at me, its form shifting and warping into something monstrous. I barely had time to throw up my hands in defense before we collided. The battle that ensued was like nothing I had ever experienced. It wasn't just physical, though I felt every blow as if it were landing on my actual body. It was a clash of wills, of light against shadow, of hope against despair. We grappled in that strange in-between space, neither fully in the mirror world, nor in reality. I could feel the entity trying to worm its way into my mind, to find the cracks in my psyche where it could take hold. "Give in, Emma," it whispered seductively. "Think of the power you could have. No more fear, no more doubt, just pure, unbridled strength." For a moment I faltered. The offer was tempting, to never feel weak or afraid again. But then I remembered the faces of those trapped souls, the anguish in their eyes. "Never," I growled, pushing back with all my might. The entity snarled, its form flickering between my reflection and something far more monstrous. "Then you'll die here, just like all the others." It redoubled its assault, and I felt myself being pushed back. My strength was waning, the constant barrage of psychic and physical attacks taking their toll. The darkness began to creep in at the edges of my vision. "You're alone, Emma," the entity taunted. "No one's coming to save you. No one even knows you're here." As if in answer to its words, I heard a faint voice calling my name. "Emma! Emma, can you hear me? Don't give up!" Dr. Clark's voice, muffled but unmistakable, cut through the chaos. With it came a surge of strength, a reminder of why I was fighting. "I'm not alone," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. "And I'm not afraid of you." The entity hissed, recoiling slightly. "Lies, I can taste your fear. It's what drew me to you in the first place." "You're right," I admitted, surprised by my own calm. "I am afraid, but that doesn't make me weak. It makes me human." With each word, I felt a change coming over me. The oppressive atmosphere of the mirror world seemed to lighten, and I stood straighter, more confident. "My fear, my doubts, my regrets, they're all part of who I am," I continued, advancing on the now retreating entity. "But so is my strength, my courage, and my compassion." "No!" it shrieked, its form becoming less substantial with each step I took. "You can't do this. I am eternal. I am power incarnate." I shook my head, feeling pity for this creature that knew only fear and pain. "You're nothing but a reflection of our darkest thoughts, and I'm choosing to embrace the light." With that declaration, a burst of energy exploded from within me. It radiated outward in waves, washing over the trapped souls and causing the entity to howl in agony. The vortexes of darkness began to dissipate, releasing their captives. Faces appeared all around me, confused, hopeful, grateful. They began to glow, their essences growing stronger as they broke free from the mirror's curse. "This isn't possible," the entity wailed, its form disintegrating before my eyes. "You can't defeat me. I am—" Its final words were cut off, as it exploded into a shower of glittering fragments, like a mirror shattering into a million pieces. In the sudden silence that followed, I became aware of a pulling sensation. The mirror world was collapsing, reality reasserting itself. The freed souls began to fade, moving on to whatever awaited them beyond this twisted realm. "Thank you," one whispered as it passed, its voice filled with a peace I could scarcely imagine. As the last of the souls disappeared, I felt myself falling. The world spun around me, a kaleidoscope of fractured reflections and swirling colors. Just when I thought I couldn't bear it any longer, I heard Dr. Clark's voice again, stronger this time. "Emma, follow my voice. Come back to us." With one final effort, I pushed through the dizzying vortex. There was a sensation of breaking through a barrier, and suddenly I was gasping for air, my eyes flying open. I found myself back in my own bathroom, sprawled on the floor amidst a sea of shattered glass. "Doctor," Clark was kneeling beside me, her face a mask of concern and relief. "You did it," she said, helping me to sit up. "You broke the curse. The mirror's power is destroyed." As I looked around at the destruction and felt the bone-deep weariness settling over me, I realized the true battle was only beginning. The mirror was broken, but its effects lingered. There would be nightmares, doubts, moments of weakness. But as I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a shard of glass, battered, exhausted, but undefeated, I knew I was ready to face whatever came next. I had stared into the abyss of my own fears and emerged stronger for it. The battle was over, but the journey was just beginning. The barrier between worlds trembled under my assault, a gossamer-thin membrane separating reality from the nightmare realm of the mirror. With each push, I felt it weaken, like a sheet of ice cracking under too much weight. The other souls gathered around me, their faces a mixture of hope and fear. "It's working," I shouted, my voice echoing strangely in this in-between space. "Keep pushing." I could feel the curse fighting back, its malevolent energy surging against our combined will. But we were stronger now, united in our desire for freedom. The barrier bulged and stretched, reality bleeding through in flashes of color and light. "I can see the other side," cried one of the souls, a young woman who had been trapped for decades. Her form flickered, becoming more substantial as hope surged through her. With a sound like shattering glass, the barrier finally gave way. Light flooded in, blinding after the perpetual twilight of the mirror realm. I felt myself being pulled forward, and I reached out, grabbing onto as many of the other souls as I could. "Hold on," I yelled. "We're going home." We tumbled through the fracturing barrier, a tangle of spirits and energy. But as we crossed the threshold, I felt something grab onto me. The curse, making one last desperate attempt to maintain its hold. Pain unlike anything I had ever experienced ripped through me. It felt as if my very essence was being torn apart, pulled between two realities. I could hear the other souls screaming, feel their terror and agony mingling with my own. "No!" I gritted out, fighting against the curse's grip. "You don't own us anymore!" With every ounce of strength I had left, I pushed back against the curse. I thought of my life, of Dr. Clark waiting on the other side, of all the souls who had been trapped for so long. I thought of the strength I had discovered within myself, the courage I never knew I possessed. "Let us go!" I screamed, each word a declaration of freedom. There was a moment of resistance, the curse's tendrils clawing at us, trying to drag us back. And then, with a sound like 1,000 mirrors shattering at once, it broke. An explosion of light and sound engulfed us. I felt myself falling, tumbling through a whirlwind of fractured reflections and swirling energy. The other souls streamed past me, their forms dissolving into pure light as they were finally, truly freed. "Thank you," I heard their voices whisper, fading into the distance. "We're free." And then, abruptly, it was over. I slammed back into my body with enough force to knock the wind out of me. My eyes flew open and I found myself lying on the bathroom floor, surrounded by shards of broken glass. Dr. Clark was kneeling beside me, her face etched with concern. "Emma? Emma, can you hear me?" I tried to speak, but all that came out was a weak groan. Every inch of my body ached, as if I'd been run over by a truck. But beneath the pain was an overwhelming sense of relief and triumph. "We did it," I finally managed to croak out. "They're free. It's over." Dr. Clark helped me sit up, carefully brushing shards of glass off my clothes. "You were incredible, Emma. I've never seen anything like it." As my vision cleared, I looked around the bathroom. The mirror was completely destroyed, its frame empty, save for a few jagged pieces still clinging to the edges. The air felt different, lighter somehow, as if a great weight had been lifted. "What happened?" I asked, my voice growing stronger. "From your side, I mean." Dr. Clark shook her head in amazement. "It was extraordinary. The mirror began to shake and then cracks started appearing. I could see something on the other side. Flashes of light, movement, and then you appeared, like you were pushing your way through the glass itself. When you broke through, there was this explosion of energy. The mirror shattered, and you collapsed." I nodded, trying to process it all. "And the others? The souls that were trapped?" "I saw them," Dr. Clark confirmed, her voice filled with wonder. "Just for a moment, as the mirror broke, they looked peaceful, happy. I think you really did save them, Emma." Tears welled up in my eyes, a mix of exhaustion, relief, and joy. "I can't believe it's really over." Dr. Clark helped me to my feet, steadying me as I swayed. "It is. You've done something truly remarkable, Emma. You've not only saved yourself but countless others who were trapped by the curse." As we made our way out of the bathroom, I caught a glimpse of myself in one of the remaining shards of glass. I looked different, older somehow, but also stronger. The fear that had haunted my eyes for so long was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. "What happens now?" I asked, as we settled onto the living room couch. Dr. Clark smiled warmly. "Now you rest. You've been through an ordeal that few could even imagine, let alone survive. Give yourself time to heal, both physically and mentally." I nodded, feeling the weight of exhaustion settling over me. But there was something else, a spark of excitement beneath the fatigue. "And after that?" "Well," Dr. Clark said, a hint of mischief in her eyes, "if you're interested, I think you might have a future in parapsychology. The world needs more people like you, Emma. People who can face the unknown and come out stronger for it." I felt a smile tugging at my lips. The first genuine one in what felt like years. "I'd like that," I said softly. As Dr. Clark began to tidy up, making calls to arrange for the bathroom to be cleaned and repaired, I leaned back on the couch and closed my eyes. The events of the past few hours, or was it days? Time had lost all meaning in the mirror realm, played through my mind. I had faced my deepest fears, confronted an ancient evil, and emerged victorious. I had saved not only myself, but countless others who had been trapped for centuries. The thought was almost overwhelming. But more than that, I had discovered a strength within myself that I never knew existed. I had looked into the abyss, and not only survived, but triumphed. The world suddenly seemed full of possibilities, mysteries waiting to be unraveled. As I drifted off to sleep, exhaustion finally claiming me, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. The nightmare was over, but a new adventure was just beginning, and this time I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The days following the breaking of the mirror passed in a haze of exhaustion and surreal calm. I slept for nearly 24 hours straight, my body and mind desperately trying to recover from the ordeal. When I finally awoke, the world seemed different somehow, brighter, more vivid, as if I was seeing everything through new eyes. Dr. Clark had arranged for a team of specialists to clean up the bathroom, removing every last shard of the cursed mirror. As I watched them work, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief that it was truly over, sorrow for the souls that had been trapped for so long, and a lingering fear that some remnant of the curse might remain. "How are you feeling?" Dr. Clark asked, joining me as I stood in the doorway of the now pristine bathroom. I took a deep breath, considering the question. "Honestly, I'm not sure. It's like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop, for something to jump out at me from every reflective surface." She nodded understandingly. "That's completely normal, Emma. You've been through a traumatic experience. It will take time for your mind to fully accept that the danger has passed." As the cleaning crew packed up their equipment, I found myself drawn to the empty space where the mirror had once hung. The wall looked bare, almost accusatory in its blankness. "What if it's not really over?" I whispered, voicing the fear that had been gnawing at me. "What if the curse finds another way back?" Dr. Clark placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "The curse was bound to that specific mirror, Emma. You didn't just break the glass, you shattered the very foundation of its power. It's gone." I nodded, wanting to believe her but still haunted by doubt. "I keep thinking about them," I admitted. "The souls that were trapped. I saw them leave, but where did they go? Are they at peace?" "I believe they are," Dr. Clark said softly. "From what I saw in that final moment, they seemed free, unburdened. Whatever awaited them beyond the mirror, I think it was something good." We stood in silence for a moment, contemplating the enormity of what had transpired in this small bathroom. Finally, I took a deep breath and squared my shoulders. "Okay," I said, my voice stronger than I expected. "What's next?" Dr. Clark smiled, a hint of pride in her eyes. "That's up to you, Emma. You've faced something few people could even imagine. The question is, what do you want to do with that experience?" I considered her words carefully. The ordeal had changed me. There was no denying that. I felt different, stronger in some ways, more vulnerable in others. The world suddenly seemed full of mysteries waiting to be unraveled. "I want to understand," I said slowly. "Not just what happened to me, but everything. The things that exist just beyond what we can see. I want to help people who are facing their own impossible situations." Dr. Clark's smile widened. "I was hoping you'd say that. If you're interested, I have some colleagues at the university who would be very keen to hear your story. There's so much we could learn from your experience." The idea both thrilled and terrified me. "You mean, study me?" "Not exactly," Dr. Clark clarified. "More like work with you. Your first-hand account of interdimensional travel, your ability to break a centuries-old curse, these are invaluable to our field. And your perspective could help us develop new ways to assist people dealing with paranormal phenomena. As she spoke, I felt a spark of excitement ignite within me. This was a chance to turn my harrowing experience into something positive, to use what I'd learned to help others. "I'd like that," I said, surprising myself with the conviction in my voice. Over the next few weeks, I slowly began to reclaim my life. I returned to work, explaining my absence with a vague story about a family emergency. My colleagues noticed a change in me, a new confidence, a quiet strength that hadn't been there before. If they thought it odd that I now avoided the large mirror in the office bathroom, they didn't mention it. In the evenings and on weekends, I met with Dr. Clark and her associates. I recounted my experiences in painstaking detail, submitting to a battery of tests and examinations. It was emotionally draining at times, forcing me to relive the terror and pain of those moments in the mirror realm. But it was cathartic too, helping me process what had happened and come to terms with my new reality. One evening, about a month after the incident, I found myself sitting in Dr. Clark's office, surrounded by books on paranormal phenomena and interdimensional theory. We had just finished another session of interviews, and I was feeling particularly reflective. "Do you think I'll ever fully understand what happened?" I asked, idly flipping through a tome on mirror folklore. Dr. Clark leaned back in her chair, considering the question. "Fully? Probably not. The universe is vast and complex, Emma. There are some mysteries that may always elude us, but understanding isn't always about having all the answers. Sometimes it's about learning to ask the right questions." I nodded, mulling over her words. "I keep thinking about the other souls that were trapped, their stories, their lives. I wish I could have learned more about them." "Perhaps that's something we can explore," Dr. Clark suggested. "Your connection to that realm might allow us to uncover historical accounts that correspond to the trapped souls. It could provide valuable insights into the mirror's history and its effects over time." The idea intrigued me, offering a new avenue for my growing fascination with the paranormal. "I'd like that," I said. "It feels like I owe it to them, you know, to make sure they're not forgotten." As our conversation wound down, I found myself standing before the small mirror hanging on Dr. Clark's office wall. For weeks, I had avoided looking directly at my reflection, always afraid of what I might see. But now, I took a deep breath and faced myself squarely. The woman looking back at me was changed, there was no denying that. There were new lines around my eyes, a gravity to my expression that spoke of the weight of my experiences. But there was something else too, a strength, a resilience that I had never seen in myself before. I smiled, and this time, it was all me. No twisted reflection, no malevolent entity lurking behind my eyes. Just Emma, scarred but unbroken. "You know," I said, turning back to Dr. Clark, "for the first time since this all started, I feel okay, like I'm finally back in control of my own story." Dr. Clark smiled warmly. "That's a huge step, Emma. Healing isn't just about overcoming the trauma. It's about reclaiming your narrative, your sense of self." As I gathered my things to leave, a thought struck me. "Dr. Clark, do you think there are others out there? People facing their own impossible mirrors, their own cursed reflections?" She nodded solemnly. "I'm certain of it. The world is full of mysteries, Emma. Some benign, some dangerous. That's why the work we do is so important." I felt a sense of purpose settling over me, a clarity I hadn't experienced in a long time. "Then that's what I want to do," I said firmly. "I want to help those people, to show them that even in the darkest moments there's hope, that they can break free just like I did." Dr. Clark's eyes shone with pride and something like excitement. "I think that's an excellent idea, Emma. In fact, I may have just the case for you to start with. Are you familiar with the legend of the Weeping Woman's Mirror in New Orleans?" As she began to outline the details of a new paranormal investigation, I felt a thrill of anticipation. The aftermath of my ordeal had been challenging, filled with nightmares and doubt. But standing there in Dr. Clark's office, I realized that it had also opened up a whole new world of possibilities. The cursed mirror that had nearly destroyed me had also set me on a new path. And as I listened to Dr. Clark describe our potential new case, I knew that this was just the beginning of a much larger adventure. The aftermath of my battle with the mirror had changed me, yes, but it had also revealed a strength I never knew I possessed. And now, armed with that strength and a newfound understanding of the world's hidden mysteries, I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. As I left Dr. Clark's office that evening, stepping out into the cool night air, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in a shop window. I smiled at the woman looking back at me, scarred, changed, but unbroken. The nightmare was over, but the real journey was just beginning.